My parents took my sister and me to dinner. She told the waiter, "We're not paying for her. Put her on a separate check." Tamsin said it with one hand around her wine glass and the other pointed directly at me. The private dining room at Aurelia House smelled like seared butter, rosemary, and expensive red wine. A violin track drifted through hidden speakers. The white tablecloth under my wrist felt cool and smooth. Across from me, my father lifted his cocktail, took one slow sip, and nodded at the waiter. He nodded. That was the part one remembered later. Not Tamsin's voice. Not my mother staring down at her untouched sea base. Not even the waiter standing there with his pen frozen above the leather check folio. My father nodded. I cut another piece of steak. My name is Marlo Voss. I was 39 years old that Mother's Day, and I owned Voss Meridian Logistics, a Charlotte company with 44 full-time employees, 3 distribution contracts across the Carolinas, and enough annual revenue that my father had stopped asking whether I was still doing warehouse work. That night, he was sitting in a private room paid for by a card connected to my company. He did not know it had already been flagged. Aurelia House was the kind of restaurant where nobody printed prices on the menu. The lighting was low enough to make every glass of wine look older than it was. Gold trim ran along the ceiling. The windows overlooked uptown Charlotte, where the buildings were black shapes against the blue evening sky. My mother had spent nearly an hour getting ready. She wore a pale blue dress and the pearl earrings my grandmother had left her. She had asked me twice whether the dress looked too formal. "It looks beautiful," I had told her. She smiled then. A small smile. The kind she used when she wanted to believe something would go well. My father, Garrick, had made the reservation. He had called it a Mother's Day dinner for Morel. Tamsin had arrived 20 minutes late, then complained that the room was too warm. "It feels like they're trying to cook us along with the lamb," she said, fanning herself with the menu. Elias, our waiter, stood beside the table with a careful smile. "I can ask the manager to lower the temperature, ma'am." Tamsin barely looked at him. "And this wine pairing is strange." I said I wanted something dry. "It is a dry red, ma'am," Elias said. She made a face and set the glass down. "Well, it tastes confused." My mother tried to redirect the conversation. "Tamsin, didn't you say you were looking at a new SUV?" Tamsin's expression changed immediately. She leaned back in her chair and touched the diamond bracelet on her wrist. "We're close," she said. "Beckett has been talking to someone at a dealership. My younger brother was not there. He had sent a message that afternoon claiming he was handling a client crisis. I knew exactly where he was. He was at a hotel in South End, charging a 3-night stay to a vendor account marked software development. I had seen the transaction at 2:14 that morning. I had not mentioned it. My father lifted the Platinum Family Expense card from his wallet when the appetizers arrived. He set it on the table beside his plate, as casually as someone setting down a house key. The card was heavy. Cold metal. Dark gray with the Voss Meridian logo pressed below the numbers. Ending in 4481. I had issued that card 18 months earlier after Garrick insisted he needed a way to handle family expenses without asking me for transfers every week. At first, it had been groceries, medical copays, a repair bill for my mother's car. Then it became country club fees. Then weekend hotel stays. Then a wine subscription that cost $1,280 every quarter. Then Tamsin's boutique purchases coded as client appreciation gifts. The card was not the problem. The people using it were. Dinner dragged on. Tamsin picked at a lobster tail she had ordered and barely touched. My mother asked about Beckett's startup. Tamsin gave a vague answer about investors and big conversations. My father nodded like he understood any of it. I kept eating. When Elias returned with the check folio, he looked toward my father. "Will the check be together this evening, sir?" Tamsin answered before Garrick could. "We're not paying for her. Put her on a separate check." Her finger moved toward me again. The room went still. Elias looked from her to my father. Then to me. My mother's hands folded in her lap. Her thumb rubbed against the edge of her napkin. She did not say my name. Garrick did not ask Tamsin to apologize. He picked up his drink. He took a sip. Then he gave Elias a short, approving nod. Yes, he said. Separate is fine. The steak on my plate was medium rare, pink at the center. The knife moved through it without resistance. I took another bite. Tamsin watched me, waiting for something. A raised voice. A scene. A reason to call me difficult. I gave her nothing. Silence had never meant surrender to me. It meant I was deciding exactly which door to close first. Elias lowered his eyes and stepped back. I'll take care of that, he said quietly. My father leaned toward Tamsin and said, some people need to learn not to assume everything is handled for them. That was when I looked at him. Not angrily. Not dramatically. I just looked. The man across from me had spent 18 months treating my company like an extension of his wallet. He had used the word family every time he wanted another exception. He had defended Beckett's startup without reading a single quarterly report. He had called my boundaries cold whenever I asked where the money went. And now he was sitting under a chandelier in a room paid for by my company, telling me not to assume things were handled. I placed my fork down beside my plate. Then I reached for my water. The glass was cold against my fingers. Across the table, the platinum card ending in 4481 caught the light. I watched it for 1 second. Then I stood. Excuse me, I said. I need to use the restroom. Tamsin smiled like she had won something. She had no idea that before I came back to that table, the first card would already be dead. I did not go to the restroom immediately. I stood in the hallway outside Aurelia House's private dining room, where the carpet needed every step and the air smelled faintly of cedar, polished brass, and the citrus cleaner the staff used on the marble walls. Through the closed double doors, I could still hear Tamsin's laugh. It had the same sharp lift at the end that it always had when she believed someone else had been put in their place. For a moment, I looked through the glass partition toward uptown Charlotte. Then I thought about how my family had learned to mistake access for ownership. Voss Meridian Logistics began with one contract. Not a trust fund. Not a family investment. Not a favor for my father. A regional appliance distributor had a warehouse outside Gastonia that was losing inventory every week because nobody had a reliable receiving system. Their loading schedules were handwritten. Their returns sat on pallets for months. Their overnight supervisor was making decisions from a clipboard that had coffee stains older than some of the employees. I was 27 when I walked into that building. My father called me too serious back then. He said I should stop treating every conversation like a board meeting. My brother Beckett called me the warehouse warden. My mother would smile and say I had always been practical, as though practicality were a personality flaw she needed to soften for other people. The contract was worth $86,000 for the first year. I spent 14-hour days inside that warehouse. I rebuilt the receiving schedule. I created vendor scorecards. I installed barcode tracking and tied every delivery delay to a documented cause. By the end of the first quarter, shrinkage dropped by 31%. The distributor renewed early. One contract became 3. 3 became a company with 44 employees, 12 fleet agreements, and a compliance division that had saved clients more money than most people spent on their homes. Nobody in my family cared about those details until the money became useful. My father's failed real estate deal happened 6 years after I signed that first warehouse contract. Garrick had invested in a mixed-use development outside Lake Norman. The project had been marketed as a luxury waterfront district with retail space, short-term rentals, and a marina that was never fully approved. He lost $1.7 million. Most of it had been borrowed against assets that were supposed to be protected. I remember sitting across from him in my office while he explained the situation. His suit jacket was unbuttoned. His tie had been loosened. He kept tapping his wedding ring against the conference table. It was one bad deal, he said. It was a bad deal with 8 separate lenders, I replied. My mother sat beside him, silent for most of that meeting. When she finally spoke, she did not ask me to forgive him. She asked whether I could help them avoid losing the house. I did. I created a family office structure through a separate limited liability company. The arrangement covered the old debt, the mortgage arrears, and their monthly expenses. There were written limits. There were reporting requirements. There were transfer approvals above $7,500. I thought structure would protect everyone. Instead, it made the money easier to reach. Beckett came to me 2 years later with a presentation for a software platform that would supposedly help independent freight carriers find and use warehouse capacity. The deck was glossy. The projections were aggressive. The market research had 3 different fonts and no actual source citations. Still, I gave him a startup budget. It was $240,000 for 12 months, released in monthly tranches after compliance review. He got office space in South End. He got computers, software licenses, and a vendor development allowance. My father received the Platinum Family Expense Card ending in 4481, limited to medical expenses, home maintenance, and pre-approved household costs. The rules were clear. At first, they followed them. Then Tamsin married Beckett. She arrived at family dinners wearing clean lines, neutral colors, and a smile that looked carefully practiced. She talked about branding, visibility, and the life people expect when they hear the Voss name. She never asked outright for money. That would have required honesty. Instead, she made requests sound like investments. A resort stay in Napa became a potential client retreat. A $4,600 handbag became a relationship-building expense. A private dining room became an investor dinner, even when the only people present were family members who had never invested in anything. A 3-year lease on a silver SUV became a transportation requirement for Beckett's business development work. The charges accumulated in neat rows. Lucan Mercer, my chief compliance advisor, had been with Voss Meridian for 9 years. He had a background in commercial risk controls and a habit of speaking only when the documents had finished speaking first. 18 months earlier, I asked him to start a quiet review. He named it Project Lantern. The file reached 74 pages. There were 186 flagged transactions. Every line had a date, merchant code, payment source, authorization method, and matching receipt when one existed. Resort charges in Cabo were coded as industry research. A designer boutique in Buckhead was marked as a client gift supplier. The SUV down payment had been buried under a vendor conference category. That was the part one found most useful. People who lie about money almost never believe anyone will read the labels they create. Back in the dining room, Tamsin lifted her wine glass again. Positano was perfect, she said. We found this place above the water where they brought breakfast to the terrace every morning. My mother looked up, trying to sound interested. That must have been lovely. It was, Tamsin said. Beckett works hard. We deserve to enjoy the rewards sometimes. I watched my father nod. Then I looked at the empty chair beside Tamsin. Beckett had not been handling a client crisis. He had been sitting in a South End hotel suite charged to a vendor account, likely waiting for Tamsin to send him an update about dinner. He had never stopped her. Not once. He liked the resorts. He liked the lease cars. He liked that his startup office looked successful from the street. I had not been funding a family. I had been underwriting a performance. And the people at the table still believed the show would continue after dessert. I placed my napkin beside my plate and stood before anyone could decide whether I needed permission. Excuse me, I said. I'll be back in a minute. My father did not look up from his drink. Tamsin was still studying the dessert menu, as if she had not just pointed at me and told a stranger that I was not worth including. My mother's eyes followed me to the door, but she said nothing. The private dining room closed behind me with a soft click. Outside, Aurelia House became quieter by degrees. The jazz from the main dining floor reached the hallway as a muted piano line. Glassware clinked somewhere beyond the wine wall. A server in a black apron passed me carrying a tray of espresso cups, and the smell of dark coffee followed him toward the kitchen. I walked past the framed black and white photographs of old Charlotte, past the brass sconces, past the narrow alcove where guests waited for their cars. My heels made almost no sound on the thick carpet. I had spent years learning that a meeting should never end at the moment someone believes they have won. The restroom was at the end of the hall, behind a walnut door with a small gold plaque. Inside, the marble floors were pale gray and polished enough to reflect the soft overhead lights. A bowl of white orchids sat beside the sinks. The room smelled faintly of lemon oil and expensive hand soap. I locked the door. Then I took out my phone. Lucan Mercer answered on the second ring. Marlowe. His voice was even as usual. Lucan had been chief compliance advisor at Voss Meridian for 9 years. Before that, he had spent 12 years handling internal controls for a regional freight company that had nearly collapsed under vendor fraud. He did not dramatize information. He organized it. Are you still at Aurelia House? He asked. Yes. He paused for half a second. Did something happen? I leaned one hand against the cold marble counter and looked at my reflection in the mirror. Tamsin told the waiter they would not pay for my dinner, I said. Garrick agreed. Lucan did not react immediately. He never filled silence because it made other people uncomfortable. Then he said, understood. Deactivate every card. Freeze the vendor access. And pull the default file before midnight. I heard the faint sound of typing on his end. Confirming scope, he said. Family expense card ending in 4481. Beckett's development card ending in 1192. Tamsin's supplemental travel card ending in 6037. You also want the digital wallets attached to all 3 profiles disabled. Yes. Office access? Terminate Beckett's access to the South End suite. Disable his badge, remove his credentials from the building portal, and suspend the lease payment authorization. Vendor accounts? Freeze every open vendor account under Beckett's startup. No new purchase orders. No subscriptions. No transfers. No payment releases without your written approval. Lucan's keyboard clicked again. And the vehicle leases? He asked. Flag them for review. Do not seize anything tonight. I want the records preserved exactly as they are. That mattered. The difference between anger and control is documentation. I did not want a scene in a restaurant parking lot. I did not want Beckett calling people and claiming I had acted without cause. I wanted dates, signatures, contract clauses, and access logs. I wanted every decision to stand on its own when someone else eventually read it. Lucan said, there is one item you should know before we proceed with the residence file. I turned toward the sink and ran cold water over my fingertips. Tell me. The trust-backed residence loan is already in breach territory. File VM 7719 has a financial compliance clause tied to fraud, unauthorized use of affiliated accounts, and material misrepresentation in vendor reporting. I shut off the water. How close? Close enough that the trigger is available now, he said. The clause does not require a criminal conviction. It requires documented misuse of authorization and a certified internal review. The file had been sitting in the system for months. Beckett and Tamsin's townhouse in Wexford Glen was not theirs in the way they told people it was. My family office had purchased the property after 2 banks rejected Beckett's mortgage application. The trust had underwritten the loan, and the agreement gave them a payment schedule that no commercial lender would have accepted. They had missed 19 payments. I had allowed extensions because my mother asked me to. Not because the contract lacked teeth. Lucan continued. Once I submit the compliance report, the loan can move into acceleration. The balance becomes immediately due. We can prepare the notice overnight and serve it tomorrow. Do it tomorrow morning. Marlowe. His voice changed slightly then. Not softer. More precise. Are you certain you want to trigger acceleration before the restaurant situation is resolved? I looked down at my phone. The screen showed the time, 8:42 p.m. Behind the restroom door, a burst of laughter rose from the dining room and faded again. They had 18 months of warnings, I said. They had a written budget. They had monthly statements. They had every chance to stop using my name like a blank check. Lucan said nothing. I picked up a linen hand towel and dried my fingers carefully. They just chose the last warning in front of an audience. He exhaled once, quietly. Understood. I will deactivate the cards now, suspend the access permissions, and have the default packet ready before midnight. The acceleration notice will be prepared for review at 7 a.m. Good. One more question, Lucan said. Do you want Adrian Cole notified before the card is declined? I looked toward the closed walnut door. Yes. Tell him the card will return a permanent deactivation message. He will know what to do. I'll handle it. The call ended. For a few seconds, I stood alone in the marble room with the water still shining on the edge of the sink. They thought they had embarrassed me over dinner. They did not understand that dinner was the last invoice I would ever allow them to send me. I slipped my phone back into my clutch. I adjusted the cuff of my sleeve. Then I unlocked the restroom door and started walking toward the private dining room. By the time I reached the hallway corner, the first account had already gone dark. When I returned to the private dining room, nobody asked what had taken me so long. Tamsin was leaning toward my father, showing him something on her phone. The screen glowed between them with photos of a cliffside hotel, blue water, white umbrellas, and a breakfast tray arranged with the kind of care that usually comes with a nightly rate nobody mentions out loud. My spa package was the best part, she said. 3 days, private massage suite, the whole thing. We should go back in the fall. Garrick gave a low laugh. After Beckett closes this partnership, you can go wherever you want. My mother sat beside him with both hands around her water glass. Her sea base had gone cold. She looked at me when I entered, then looked away when Tamsin noticed. I slid into my chair. The check folio sat in the center of the table, black leather against white linen. Elias stood a few feet away, waiting with the careful posture of someone trained not to become visible during a family problem. I opened my clutch and took out 2 crisp $100 bills. I placed them on top of the folio. That covers my dinner and Mom's, I said. My father looked down at the cash, then at me. You're making this bigger than it needs to be. No, I said. I'm making it smaller. Tamsin laughed under her breath. Of course you are. You always need a statement. I did not answer her. I folded my hands on the table and looked toward Elias. Please apply that to our portion. Elias gave a quick nod. Yes, Ms. Voss. Garrick leaned back in his chair, his expression tightening around the mouth. He opened his wallet and removed the Voss Meridian family expense card ending in 4481. Under the chandelier, its dark metal surface caught a warm yellow shine. The company logo was stamped beneath his name. He dropped it onto the folio with a firm click. Put the rest on this, he told Elias. And bring the dessert menu. Elias reached for the card. Tamsin tilted her head toward me, still smiling. Honestly, this is embarrassing for everyone. It was just a dinner. She picked up her wine glass and took a slow sip. Anyway, I found the exact SUV I want. It's this deep metallic gray with the cream interior. The dealership said they can hold it if Beckett puts down a deposit this week. My father glanced toward the empty chair beside her. Your husband has always had good instincts. The chair had been empty for over an hour. Beckett had texted the family group at 7:18 p.m., claiming an urgent client issue had kept him at his South End office. At 8:14 p.m., his room charge at the Wren Hotel had posted under a Voss Meridian vendor category labeled Business Development. He was not handling a client crisis. He was avoiding a dinner where he knew Tamsin would speak for him. Tamsin tapped her nails against the stem of her glass. The partnership is practically done, she said. They just need to see the platform one more time. Once it's signed, the startup won't need anyone's help. I looked at her. Which partnership? She paused. The one Beckett mentioned. He has mentioned several. Her smile thinned. It's confidential. Of course it is. My father gave me a warning look. Marlowe. I turned toward him. What? He is trying to build something. There is no need to interrogate him through his wife. I let that sit between us. The startup had 14 active users. 11 were contractors paid through Beckett's own budget to test the system. 2 were former friends from college. The last one belonged to an email address that had never logged in after the first week. There was no partnership. There was no revenue. There was only a polished office, expensive furniture, and a stream of expense reports that had become increasingly creative every month. I watched Tamsin turn back toward her wine. I did not need to humiliate them. Their own spending habits had already built the stage. 3 minutes passed. Then 4. The room stayed quiet except for the piano from the main dining floor and the soft clink of dishes being cleared in the hallway. My father began to look toward the door more often. Tamsin checked her phone twice. My mother's thumb rubbed the edge of her napkin. At 9:03 p.m., the door opened. Adrian Cole, Aurelia House's general manager, walked in first. He was a narrow, composed man in a black suit, with silver at his temples and the expression of someone who had spent 20 years making wealthy people feel important without ever giving them control of a room. Behind him stood Dorian Pike, head of security. Dorian was broad-shouldered and still. He wore a dark suit with no visible earpiece, though I knew he had one. Adrian was not carrying a dessert menu. He held the Voss Meridian card in his right hand. Or what was left of it. He walked to the table and placed two jagged halves of metal in front of my father. They landed with a dry, heavy sound. Tamsin stopped moving. My mother inhaled once. Garrick stared at the pieces. The Voss Meridian logo had been split straight through the middle. Adrian folded his hands in front of him. "Mr. Voss," he said, his voice measured enough for the nearby tables to hear without needing to rise, "Ms. Voss has paid for herself and her mother. The remaining balance is now your responsibility." Garrick looked up slowly. "What is this?" "The issuer has permanently deactivated the account," Adrian said. "We were instructed to retain the card. Your balance for the remaining meals, beverages, and service is $1,060. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Tamsin reached into her handbag. "This is ridiculous," she said. "Run mine." She handed Adrian a glossy black card. He used the wireless terminal at the table. The machine gave one short beep. Adrian looked at the screen. "I'm sorry. This card has been declined." Tamsin's face changed, but only slightly. She pulled out another card. "That one is for emergencies." The second terminal beep sounded sharper. Adrian's expression did not move. "That card has also been declined." My father turned his head toward me. The movement was slow, controlled. He was still hoping that I would see the room, see the manager, see the security guard behind him, and rescue him from the inconvenience of consequences. I met his eyes. Then Tamsin pulled out a third card. And I waited for Adrian to run it. The third card made the same clean, unforgiving sound. One short beep. Adrian Cole looked down at the terminal, then back at Tamsin. "I'm sorry," he said. "This account has also been declined." Tamsin kept her hand extended for a second longer than necessary. Her fingers were perfectly still, but the knuckles had gone pale beneath the rings she liked to stack across both hands. "That is impossible," she said. Adrian returned the card without argument. "Those are the results provided by the issuing institutions." My father pushed his chair back. The wooden legs scraped across the floor hard enough that two people at the next table looked over. "Marlowe," he said. I did not answer immediately. I lifted my water glass and took one measured drink. The ice had melted enough to soften the taste. Then I set it down. "What is it, Dad?" His face had changed since Adrian placed the broken card on the table. The irritation was still there, but it now sat beneath something more useful to me, calculation. He was looking at the room. The neighboring diners. The manager. Dorian Pike standing behind Adrian with both hands folded at his waist. He understood that the scene could grow larger. "You've made your point," Garrick said. "Pay the balance so we can leave." Tamsin let out a sharp breath. "Yes, Marlowe. This is ridiculous. You are turning a misunderstanding into a public spectacle." My mother looked from them to me. Her hands were still folded in her lap, but the napkin beneath her thumbs had been twisted into a narrow white rope. I looked at the black leather folio. I looked at the two severed pieces of the card ending in 4481. Then I looked at my father. "I paid for myself," I said. "I paid for Mom." Garrick's jaw tightened. "You know exactly what I mean." "Yes," I said. "That is why I am answering clearly." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "This is family embarrassment." It was an interesting phrase, coming from a man whose approval had just told a waiter to isolate me at a Mother's Day dinner. I stood and walked around the table to my mother's chair. "Marlowe," Morel said quietly. I rested one hand on the back of her chair. "You're coming with me." Her eyes lifted to mine. For a moment, I saw the version of my mother who had spent years asking everyone to be patient with everyone else. She had tried to keep dinners smooth, holidays quiet, birthdays intact. She had treated every insult like a spill that could be wiped away before anyone noticed. Then she looked at Tamsin. Tamsin was still sitting rigidly in her chair, her handbag open beside her, 3 declined cards arranged on the table like evidence she had not expected anyone to see. My mother stood. I picked up her wrap from the back of her chair. It was soft cream cashmere, the one she wore whenever she wanted to feel dressed up without drawing attention to herself. I placed it around her shoulders and adjusted the collar near her neck. Tamsin's chair slammed backward. "You are seriously leaving us with this?" she demanded. I turned toward her. "You told the waiter you were not paying for me. That was before you decided to act like a child." "No," I said. "It was before you realized the cards were not yours." The room became quiet again. Tamsin's mouth opened, then closed. Her eyes moved to Garrick, waiting for him to take over. My father rose slowly, one hand flat against the table. "You are overreacting over a dinner bill," Tamsin said, louder now. $1,060. That's what this is about? You're going to destroy the whole night over a bill. I looked at her for a moment. Then I glanced down at the cut pieces of the card. This has never been about $1,060. Her expression shifted. The anger remained, but something else passed through it. A brief uncertainty. She knew enough about their accounts to understand that I had not acted because of one restaurant charge. I placed my hand lightly at the center of my mother's back. "I paid for myself," I said. "The rest of you can finally start doing the same." We walked toward the door. Behind us, Garrick said my name again. This time, he did not sound angry. He sounded like someone who had just noticed the ground moving beneath him. I did not turn around. The hallway outside the private room was cooler than the dining room. The soft jazz had changed songs. Somewhere near the bar, someone laughed too loudly, and the sound faded beneath the low hum of conversation. My mother and I passed the host stand and stepped into the main lobby. The glass front doors showed the dark sidewalk outside, brightened by streetlights and the steady sweep of passing headlights. We stopped beside the windows. From there, we could see into the private dining room through a narrow gap in the frosted glass. Adrian remained at the table. Dorian Pike had moved closer behind my father, not touching him, not speaking, simply making the terms of the situation clear. Then the dining room door opened again. Beckett walked in. He was wearing the navy suit he used for investor meetings, though the collar had been loosened and his hair looked damp from the evening air. He must have arrived after receiving Tamsin's message. His eyes moved first to her, then to Garrick, then to the pieces of the metal card on the table. Tamsin stood quickly and went to him. "Fix this," she said. Beckett looked at the amount on the folio. Then he looked through the glass and saw me standing beside our mother. I watched him reach for his wrist. The gold chronograph I had given him after his college graduation flashed beneath the chandelier. Back then, I had thought it would remind him that time mattered. I had chosen the engraving myself. Build something worth keeping. His thumb found the clasp. The tiny click carried through the glass when it came loose. Beckett removed the watch slowly. Adrian inspected it beneath the light, then gave one brief nod. The watch went into the manager's inside pocket. Tamsin turned toward me. Her face was white with anger. She did not see a consequence. She saw an attack. For years, I had mistaken rescue for love. Standing outside that restaurant, I finally understood the difference. Then I guided my mother through the glass doors and into the Charlotte night. For the first 10 minutes after we left Aurelia House, neither of us spoke. Charlotte moved past the windows in long ribbons of white and red light. The streets around uptown were still busy, even after 9:30. Pedestrians crossed against the signals near Tryon Street. A delivery truck idled beside a hotel entrance. The skyline reflected across the hood of my car whenever we stopped at a light. My mother sat beside me with both hands folded over her cream cashmere wrap. She had not cried inside the restaurant. She had held herself together while Tamsin raised her voice, while my father tried to turn his own humiliation into my responsibility, and while Beckett removed the watch I had given him to settle a bill he should have been able to pay himself. But when we turned onto Queens Road, Morel brought one hand to her mouth. "I do not understand them," she said. Her voice was low. The words were nearly lost beneath the quiet hum of the tires. "I do not understand how Tamsin could say that to you. Or how your father could sit there and agree. I kept both hands on the steering wheel. You saw how they did it. I saw it, she said. I just do not understand when they became people who could do it. The road curved through a stretch of old trees and dark brick homes. Rain from earlier in the evening still clung to the pavement, turning every street lamp into a blurred gold stain. I could have taken her home. Instead, I turned left toward the overlook above the city. The parking area was nearly empty. A single sedan sat near the far guardrail, its occupants hidden behind fogged glass. I pulled into a space facing the downtown skyline, put the car in park, and let the engine run for a moment before shutting it off. The silence changed when the car went dark. Morel looked at me. Why are we here? I reached into the back seat and pulled my leather briefcase forward. It had been behind my passenger seat all evening. I had brought it because I had planned to review Lucan's latest compliance notes after dinner. At least, that was what I had told myself. The truth was that I had been carrying those records with me for 3 days because I knew I was getting close to a decision. I opened the briefcase, removed my tablet, and entered the security code. Lucan had sent the updated report at 8:51 p.m., 9 minutes after I called him from the marble restroom. The subject line read, Project Lantern. Supplemental financial irregularities. I opened it. The screen filled the car with pale blue light. Marlo, my mother said, what is that? Something I should have shown you earlier. I turned the tablet toward her. The first page was a summary sheet. It listed 186 flagged transactions over 18 months, cross-referenced against Voss Meridian expense accounts, family office transfers, vendor invoices, and Beckett's startup budget. The categories were arranged in columns: travel, vehicle costs, hospitality, luxury goods, unsupported vendor payments. My mother stared at the page. That cannot be right. It is documented, I said. Every entry has a receipt, account number, date, and approval trail. She touched the screen with one finger, moving slowly down the highlighted lines. Cabo Resort. Vendor Conference. Buckhead Boutique. Client Gifts. Wren Hotel. Business Development. A private dining charge from 2 months earlier. Partnership meeting. The names changed. The language did not. She reached the final item on the first page and stopped. What is this? I zoomed in. The document was titled Emergency Line of Credit Authorization. The amount was listed in bold near the center of the screen. $58,400. Below it was my name. Below that was a signature that looked like mine. My mother leaned closer. The light from the tablet sharpened the lines around her eyes. That is your signature. It is shaped like my signature, I said. She looked at me. I never signed it. The words sat between us. I swiped to the next page. The authorization had been submitted at 2:14 a.m. on February 6th. The credit line had been opened against my collateral reserve through the family office structure. The funds had moved through a temporary holding account less than 16 hours later. Then they went to a luxury dealership in South Charlotte. There was a wire transfer receipt. There was a dealership invoice. There was a vehicle identification number. There was a down payment confirmation. Morel's face went still. On the screen was a photograph from the delivery file, a metallic gray SUV under showroom lights, a large satin bow tied across the hood. Tamsin's SUV. The same one she had described over dinner as if it were the natural reward for a life well lived. My mother had seen that car before. She had stood in our driveway 3 weeks earlier while Tamsin pulled in behind the wheel, sunglasses pushed into her hair, telling everyone that Beckett had finally made it. Morel remembered it at the same moment I did. She brought it to the house, she said. Yes. She said it was his first real success. Yes. My mother kept looking at the vehicle invoice. Her hand had stopped moving. I gave her the rest of the sequence because the sequence mattered. Beckett accessed an old file archive from the year I refinanced the Lake Norman Distribution Center. It contained scanned versions of my prior signatures, identity verification records, and a dormant authorization template from the family office. She swallowed. He had access to those? He had temporary access 2 years ago while he was helping Dad sort old business files. I revoked it after that. But he saved them. Yes. He used them to take money from you. He used them to open a credit line against my reserve. I looked at her directly. He did not borrow from me. He forged me. My mother leaned back against the seat. Outside, Charlotte spread beneath us, all glass and traffic lights and dark streets that seemed very far away. Her eyes remained on the tablet, but she was no longer reading the numbers. For years, she had asked me to be patient with people who never once asked permission before hurting me. I had always believed her requests came from love. That night, I saw the cost of them more clearly. Morel reached for the tablet again. Her fingers did not tremble now. "What happens next?" she asked. I closed the vehicle invoice and opened the evidence index Lucan had prepared. The first tab was labeled Unauthorized Authorization. The second was Vendor Misuse. The third was Residence Loan Compliance. I looked at the red markers beside each file. Then I turned the tablet toward her. "Tomorrow morning," I said, "we stop treating this like a family misunderstanding." The Financial Crimes Division occupied the third floor of a county building on East 4th Street, above a records office and below a courtroom that handled property disputes. The lobby smelled like burnt coffee, printer toner, and rain brought in on wet shoes. Morel and I arrived at 8:17 on Monday morning. She wore a charcoal coat over the pale blue dress from the night before. She had changed her shoes, tied her hair back, and left her pearl earrings on the bathroom counter at my house. I noticed that detail because she never left the house without them. The elevator doors opened onto a narrow hallway with gray walls and framed notices about identity theft, wire fraud, and consumer reporting rights. At the end of the hall, Detective Sloan Barrett waited beside a glass door marked Financial Crimes Division. He was in his early 50s, with a dark suit, a navy tie, and a legal pad tucked under one arm. Lucan had spoken with him before we arrived. Sloan had spent 23 years with Mecklenburg County, including 9 years in financial investigations. He did not greet us with sympathy. He greeted us with a procedure. "Ms. Voss." "Mrs. Voss," he said. "Come with me." His office was small and practical. One wall held filing cabinets. Another held a whiteboard covered with dates and case numbers. A metal table stood in the center of the room beneath fluorescent lights that made every surface look colder than it was. I placed the binder on the table. It was labeled Forensic Fraud Packet. 42 exhibits. The spine was reinforced with metal. The red tabs along the edge separated the evidence into sections: signature comparison, account access, transfer path, vendor misuse, dealership records, and supporting communications. Detective Barrett rested his hand on the cover. "Walk me through the sequence from the beginning," he said. I opened the binder. On February 6th at 2:14 a.m., an emergency line of credit request was submitted through the Voss Family Office portal. The authorization used my name, my identification data, and a signature image that resembles mine. I slid Exhibit 1 toward him. The request created a line of credit for $58,400 against my collateral reserve. The funds moved into a temporary holding account at 9:32 that morning. Sloan studied the first page. "Did you authorize this line?" "No." "Did you sign this document?" "No." He placed a yellow marker beside the signature. "Who had access to your historical records?" "My brother, Beckett Voss. 2 years ago, he helped my father organize archived real estate files. Some of those files included prior signature scans and identity verification documents." "Was that access documented?" "Yes." Exhibit 14 contains the archive access log and user permissions. He turned to the tab. The pages made a dry sound in the quiet office. The log showed Beckett's old user profile. It showed 3 after-hours entries into the archive folder on January 29th, February 1st, and February 5th. It showed a download of my former refinancing package less than 12 hours before the credit request was submitted. Sloan made a note. "What happened to the money after it entered the holding account?" I moved to Exhibit 6. At 3:48 p.m. on February 6th, $56,900 was wired to Kingsley Motor Gallery in South Charlotte. The remaining $1,500 was used for registration fees and insurance processing. The dealership invoice was next. Metallic gray sport utility vehicle. Cream leather interior. Purchaser, Tamsin Voss. Morel looked down at the paper. The edge of her sleeve touched the table, but she did not move it. Detective Barrett examined the invoice, then the bank transfer confirmation. Was the vehicle delivered? Yes, I said. Tamsin drove it to my parents' home on April 14th. She told them Beckett had finally made it. My mother's gaze remained on the invoice. Sloane looked toward her. Mrs. Voss, I need to ask you directly. Did you know your son had used your daughter's identity or collateral reserve to obtain these funds? No, she said. Her voice did not shake. Did you approve the vehicle purchase? No. Did you benefit from the funds? No, he slid a sworn statement across the table. The document was 3 pages. It stated that Morel had no knowledge of the authorization, no participation in the transfer, and no involvement in the vehicle purchase. It also included the date, time, location, and a notarized signature line. She read every paragraph. Then she picked up the pen. The sound of the pen moving across the paper was the only thing in the room for several seconds. Justice did not feel loud. It felt like signing my name under the truth and refusing to erase it again. Morel placed the pen down. Detective Barrett clipped the statement behind Exhibit 9 and opened the next section. These vendor records, he said. Explain the connection. I handed him the compliance summary Lucan had prepared. The first sheet listed 186 flagged transactions across 18 months. The second cross-referenced them against Beckett's startup budget, Garrick's family expense card, Tamsin's supplemental travel card, and the temporary holding account used in the line of credit transfer. Some charges were legitimate at first, I said. Server hosting, office supplies, small contractor payments. Then the merchant codes shifted. I pointed to the highlighted rows. Resorts were coded as industry research. Designer boutiques were categorized as client gifts. Hotel stays were submitted as business development. The vehicle down payment was buried under a vendor conference classification. Sloane read the summary without interrupting. Then he looked up. Based on what I have here, this presents indicators of forgery, identity theft, misuse of authorization, and possible fraud conspiracy. I cannot make a charging decision today, but I can open a formal investigation. That is all I am asking for, I said. He nodded. You will both receive case information by the end of the week. Do not contact Mr. Voss about the evidence. Do not alter any records. Preserve devices, emails, and account access exactly as they are. I already have, I said. When we left the building, the rain had stopped. The sidewalk was dark and wet, reflecting the courthouse windows across the street. Morel stood beside my car without reaching for the door. For a moment, she looked older than she had the night before. Then she turned toward me. I kept telling you that family needed grace, she said. I waited. She pressed her lips together once. I spent too long protecting people from consequences they were willing to hand to you. I unlocked the car. You do not need to protect me from them anymore. She nodded slowly. No, she said. I do not. We got into the car. At 8:56 a.m., Lucan sent me a message. Beckett's office access had been suspended. Every vendor account was frozen. The acceleration notice for the Wexford Glen townhouse was ready for service. The financial investigation had a case number. The house had a deadline. And Beckett still had no idea how much of his life had already been documented. By 7:12 the next morning, the South End Innovation District was still half asleep. The coffee shops along Camden Road had their lights on, but most of the sidewalks were empty. Delivery vans moved slowly through the narrow streets. Construction crews were already working 2 blocks away, their drills and reverse alarms echoing between glass buildings. Beckett's office suite sat on the 4th floor of a renovated brick warehouse that had once stored textile equipment. The building now had polished concrete floors, exposed beams, and a lobby that smelled like espresso and new paint. Everything about it was designed to make people think money had arrived before the work did. Lucan stood beside me near the elevator bank, holding a slim black folder under one arm. Elodie Wynne, the outside auditor who had been reviewing Project Lantern, waited near the office entrance with a clipboard and a rolling stack of plastic recovery crates. Elodie had spent 14 years in corporate asset tracing. She had a quiet voice, rectangular glasses, and a habit of reading serial numbers twice before she wrote anything down. She did not care who owned the room. She cared who had paid for it. For members of Voss Meridian Corporate Security were already inside the suite. At 7:15, Elodie looked at her watch. Asset recovery begins now, she said. The glass doors opened with a security override. I stepped inside. Beckett had called the Space Harbor Line Systems. The name was printed in brushed steel letters on the reception wall. Beneath it stood a curved desk made from white oak and brass, though there had never been a receptionist to sit behind it. The suite had 32 desks. Only 6 showed signs of use. The rest held spotless monitors, unopened notebooks, and company-branded mugs arranged beside keyboards that had barely been touched. A custom espresso machine stood beside a marble counter near the windows. There was a lounge area with imported leather chairs, a wall-mounted television, and a refrigerated bar stocked with sparkling water, craft beer, and bottles of wine. The most active thing in the office was the automatic diffuser near the front door. It released a clean cedar scent every 6 minutes. Elodie, I said. She lifted the clipboard. 63 serialized items, she said. 12 laptops, 18 monitors, 6 desktop towers, 4 server units, 7 tablets, 9 mobile devices, 4 docking stations, and 3 network storage units. Furniture and subscription services are listed separately. The security team moved through the room with practiced efficiency. They unplugged monitors. They photographed serial numbers. They placed hard drives into padded sleeves. Packing tape ripped through the quiet space. Plastic crates clicked against polished concrete. Elodie read each number in a low, even voice while an assistant entered it into the inventory system. Laptop, Harborline Asset Tag 0117. Confirmed. Monitor, Voss Meridian Tag 0426. Confirmed. Server unit, registered under Voss Meridian Logistics, Procurement File 2024-18. Confirmed. No one rushed. That was important. When an asset recovery becomes emotional, it becomes easy for the other side to call it retaliation. When it follows an inventory, a contract, and a chain of custody, it becomes a procedure. I walked toward the windows. The Charlotte skyline rose beyond the rail line, clear in the morning light. Below us, people were moving into offices where they would answer calls, ship products, resolve errors, and earn salaries through work that could be measured. Beckett had filled this room with expensive things because he believed appearance could substitute for work. His platform had 14 active user accounts. 11 belonged to paid testers. 2 belonged to friends from college. 1 had not logged in since the second week after launch. There were no real clients. There was no signed partnership. There was no revenue beyond transfers from my company. At 7:58, the elevator chimed. Everyone in the suite became still without being told to. Through the glass doors, I watched Beckett walk down the hall. He wore the same navy suit from the restaurant, though the collar was open and his face looked unwashed. His hair was flattened on one side. He had likely spent most of the night trying to understand why every card, account, and payment portal had gone silent. He stopped at the entry reader and held his access fob against it. The light flashed red. He frowned and tried again. Red. His shoulders changed after the third attempt. He pulled the handle. The door held. Then he looked through the glass. He saw the crates. He saw the security team disconnecting the server rack. He saw Elodie standing near the front desk with the clipboard. Finally, he saw me. His mouth opened. He raised both hands and struck the glass with his palms. Marlowe. The sound was dull through the reinforced doors. He hit the glass again. What are you doing? Lucan walked to the door and entered the master code. The lock released, but only enough for him to open one side of the door several inches. A security officer stepped into the opening. Beckett tried to push forward. The officer did not move. Lucan handed Beckett the black folder. This is a default and termination notice, he said. Your access to the suite, company equipment, vendor accounts, and payment authority ended at 7 o'clock this morning. Beckett stared at the folder. You cannot do this, he said. I have a lease. Lucan pointed to a marked page in the addendum. Section 14.3. Fraud against a principal or affiliated beneficiary triggers immediate termination, asset recovery, and suspension of all related privileges. That is not what happened. Lucan's expression remained unchanged. The investigation record will determine that. Beckett looked at me again. For the first time since he arrived, I walked closer to the doorway. You paid for this office with money you were authorized to use for a business, I said. You used it to lease appearances. His face tightened. You are destroying my company. I looked past him at the reception wall where Harbor Line Systems still gleamed in brushed steel. No, I said. I am recovering mine. He tried to laugh, but the sound did not form correctly. You think you can just lock me out and take everything? I glanced at the crates rolling past behind me. You did not lose an office today, Beckett. You lost access to the illusion you were renting. Lucan closed the folder against his chest. The remaining notices will be served separately, he said. Beckett's eyes narrowed. What remaining notices? I stepped back from the doorway. At that moment, Elodie sealed the last server unit inside a plastic crate and wrote the final serial number on her inventory sheet. Beckett watched the lid close. Then his phone began to ring. Tamsin called Morel at 8:06 that morning. My mother was standing in my kitchen with a cup of tea cooling beside her. The kettle had finished boiling 3 minutes earlier, but the low mechanical click from its base still seemed to hang in the room. On the table beside her sat the copy of the sworn statement she had signed at the Financial Crimes Division. The intake number was printed at the top of the page. FC 26-1184. Morel had read it twice before answering the phone. Tamsin did not say hello. What did Marlowe do to Beckett? Her voice came through the speaker loud enough for me to hear from the other side of the kitchen island. I had just returned from Southend after the asset recovery. Lucan was sending the final inventory confirmation to the preservation folder, and I was reviewing the notice schedule on my tablet. Morel looked at the caller identification for 1 second longer, then lifted the phone to her ear. Good morning, Tamsin. Do not do that, Tamsin snapped. Do not act like this is normal. Beckett is outside his own office. His badge does not work. There are security guards taking his computers. Marlowe has frozen the cards. She shut down everything. Morel lowered herself into one of the kitchen chairs. The office was not his, she said. The equipment was not his. The money was not his. Tamsin let out a short, disbelieving laugh. You always do this. You let Marlowe talk like she owns everyone. My mother looked at the white page on the table. No, she said. I let too many people treat her like she owed them something. For a few seconds, Tamsin did not answer. Then her tone changed. It became softer, though not kinder. Mrs. Voss, you need to talk to her. She listens to you. Tell her to turn the cards back on. Tell her to give Beckett access to the office. This family cannot survive if she keeps acting like a dictator. The kettle clicked again as the metal cooled. Morel placed her free hand on the fraud packet. Your husband had access to a startup budget of $240,000, she said. He had an office suite, equipment, staff support, and vendor accounts. He also had 18 months to explain why those accounts were paying for hotel rooms, designer stores, private dinners, and your vehicle. That is not your business. It became my business when you made it family business. Tamsin's breathing changed. I could hear it through the phone. You do not understand what this is doing to us. Morel looked toward the window. The morning sun had reached the edge of the counter, catching the steam above her tea. I understand exactly what it is doing. No, you do not, Tamsin said. You think you can stand there with Marlowe and cut us off, but Beckett is your son. He is your only son. You want to lose him over a misunderstanding. My mother did not correct the word misunderstanding. She let it remain in the air where it belonged. Tamsin continued. If you let her keep doing this, you will not see him again. And when Beckett and I have children, you will not see them either. You will not hold them. You will not be invited to birthdays or holidays. You will sit alone while everyone else moves on. The threat had been used before. Not in those exact words, but in the same shape. A vague promise of future grandchildren had always been held in front of my mother whenever she questioned Tamsin's spending, Beckett's excuses, or my role in paying for things. It had worked because Morel wanted to believe she could preserve every relationship if she stayed quiet long enough. She did not stay quiet this time. You used the promise of children like a leash, Morel said. I am done letting you pull it. The silence on the other end lasted 3 seconds. Then Tamsin's voice sharpened. This is Marlo talking through you. No, my mother said. This is me after reading the records. Tamsin began speaking faster. Marlo has always been jealous of Beckett. Everyone knows it. She cannot stand that he is trying to build something without her. She wants him dependent because it makes her feel important. Now she is punishing the family because she cannot control him. I watched my mother's fingers rest on the red tabs of the binder. She had spent the previous night looking at the proof until nearly 2 in the morning. The archive access logs. The forged authorization. The transfer record. The invoice from Kingsley Motor Gallery. The photograph of Tamsin's metallic gray SUV with the oversized bow across the hood. My mother's voice stayed level. I do not want grandchildren raised by people who think stealing is a lifestyle strategy. Tamsin stopped breathing for a moment. You cannot say that about us. I can say it because I have the documents. You have no idea what Beckett told me. Then perhaps you should ask him what he did not tell you. Tamsin's voice cracked at the edge. You are choosing her over us. Morel looked toward me. I did not nod. I did not need to. She looked back at the intake number. No, she said. I am choosing the truth over a story that kept getting more expensive. Tamsin made a sound that was almost a laugh, but it did not hold together. You are going to regret this. My mother picked up the copy of her sworn statement. The Financial Crimes Division has the case now, she said. The intake number is FC 26-1184. Detective Barrett has the authorization file, the account logs, and the dealership payment records. The kitchen seemed to narrow around that sentence. Tamsin said nothing. Morel continued. They are also tracing the source of the down payment on your SUV. A glass clinked on the other end of the call. Tamsin must have been at the townhouse, standing somewhere near the kitchen island where she liked to display flowers that cost more than most people's utility bills. That car is mine, she said. The paperwork will show how it was paid for. For the first time since she called, Tamsin did not have an answer ready. Morel placed the phone on the table, still connected. You should stop calling this a family disagreement, she said. You should start deciding what you plan to disclose. Then she ended the call. The screen went dark. Outside, a car passed slowly along the street. The sunlight moved farther across the counter. My mother picked up her tea and took one small sip. She had not raised her voice. She had not begged anyone to stay. At 8:19, my phone vibrated with a message from Lucan. The acceleration notice had been finalized. A process server was already on the way to Wexford Glen. By Tuesday afternoon, Beckett and Tamsin had discovered that losing access to money changes the temperature of a room. Their cards were still inactive. The vendor accounts remained frozen. The office suite had been cleared of every Voss Meridian asset with a serial number, purchase order, or subscription agreement attached to it. The process server had delivered the acceleration notice to Wexford Glen at 11:42 that morning, and Tamsin had spent the next hour calling my mother, then calling Beckett, then calling numbers that no longer returned her calls. They needed a lawyer. Not the kind of lawyer who reads the evidence before speaking. They needed the kind who saw a family name and imagined a settlement. Quinn Harlow operated from a strip mall on the edge of South Charlotte, between a discount pharmacy and a nail salon with a flickering window sign. His office had a vinyl banner in the lobby advertising civil litigation, personal injury claims, and aggressive representation for people wronged by corporations. Beckett and Tamsin arrived just after 2 o'clock. My father joined them 20 minutes later. I know the timing because Quinn's assistant emailed Lucan a copy of the filed complaint that evening, and the metadata showed the intake meeting had started at 2:07 p.m. The building's lobby camera, later preserved through discovery, showed Tamsin entering first in a cream blazer and sunglasses, even though the sky was overcast. Beckett followed carrying a document folder with nothing useful inside it. Garrick arrived last, moving more slowly than usual, with the expression of a man who still expected the room to rearrange itself around his authority. Quinn Harlow was 58, had been licensed for 31 years, and had built his practice on contingency cases that settled before anyone read the full record. He wore a navy suit with shiny elbows and kept framed newspaper clippings on the wall behind his desk. The clippings described his victories. None described his due diligence. Tamsin began the meeting before everyone had settled into their chairs. "My sister-in-law is abusing her position," she said. "She cut off every account we had. She stole Beckett's office. She is trying to ruin us because she cannot stand that he is building something outside her control." Quinn leaned forward. "Your sister-in-law owns the company?" "She owns Voss Meridian Logistics," Beckett said. "But Harborline was mine. I built it." "What kind of agreement did you have?" "A family agreement," Garrick said. Marlowe promised she would support Beckett while he got established. The sentence sounded different in a law office than it did around a family dinner table. Quinn opened a yellow legal pad. "Was there anything in writing?" Garrick hesitated. "There were discussions. Emails. Budget approvals." "Good enough to start," Quinn said. It was not good enough to prove anything. It was good enough for Quinn to draft a complaint. Beckett told him that I had wrongfully terminated him from a company he had never been employed by. Tamsin told him I had frozen household resources that were supposedly promised to the family indefinitely. Garrick claimed I had breached a verbal family business agreement by cutting Beckett off before his startup had reached profitability. Nobody mentioned the forged line of credit. Nobody mentioned the Wren hotel charges, the private dining expenses, the designer purchases, or the transfer that paid for Tamsin's SUV. They also did not mention that the emergency loan authorization carried a signature that I had never written. Quinn did not ask. He saw a well-known logistics company, an internal family dispute, and a possible public relations problem. In his mind, that meant leverage. By Wednesday morning, he had filed a 27-page civil complaint in Mecklenburg County Superior Court. The complaint accused me of wrongful termination, breach of a family business agreement, intentional interference with Beckett's startup, and emotional damages. It claimed Beckett had been deprived of his reasonable expectation of ongoing operational support. It also requested an emergency injunction that would freeze a portion of Voss Meridian's operating assets and force me to restore Beckett's office access, startup funding, and company-paid vendor services while the case moved forward. The filing stamp was blue. The paper was thick, sharp-edged legal stock. Lucan brought it to my office at 10:18 a.m. He did not knock before entering. He never interrupted meetings without a reason. I was reviewing a carrier performance report with Elodie when he placed the complaint on my desk. "Elodie can stay," I said. Lucan opened the first page. "Quinn Harlow filed this 92 minutes ago. The emergency injunction request has been assigned a preliminary hearing date." I read the caption. Beckett Voss, Tamsin Voss, and Garrick Voss versus Marlowe Voss, Voss Meridian Logistics and Voss Meridian Family Office, Limited Liability Company. I turned the page. Lucan had marked several paragraphs in red. Wrongfully terminated employee. Marlowe Voss promised lifelong funding. Harborline Systems held active commercial partnerships. The allegations were not simply exaggerated. They were documented lies. Elodie stood near the window with her arms folded. "Do they know the financial investigation is open?" she asked. "Not officially," Lucan said. "They know the accounts were frozen. They know the resident's notice was served. They may think this is a pressure tactic." I picked up my pen and traced the red line beneath their request for an asset freeze. They wanted a court to restrict the operating capital of a company that paid 44 employees, maintained 12 fleet agreements, and managed time-sensitive distribution contracts across 3 states. They wanted the judge to force me to fund the same people who had used my name to obtain $58,400 without authorization. I set the pen down. "Have they requested documents yet?" I asked. "Not yet. The complaint is the first move. Then they've made a useful mistake." Lucan watched me. "The suit opens discovery," I said. "They're asking the court to decide whether Beckett had a legitimate business, whether he had a right to the accounts, and whether I acted without cause." Elodie understood first. "They have put the underlying records at issue." "Yes. The same lawsuit meant we could subpoena the bank records tied to the temporary holding account." We could request dealership communications, hotel invoices, subscription logs, vendor contracts, and Beckett's device access history. Every story they had told Quinn would have to survive a document request. They had chosen the one arena where confidence cannot outtalk documents. Lucan closed the complaint folder. "What do you want me to do?" I looked toward the glass wall of my office. Below us, freight trailers moved through the loading yard in exact lanes, each one scanned, routed, and assigned before it reached the gate. "Preserve everything," I said. "Prepare the discovery notices. Build the timeline from the first unauthorized charge to the vehicle transfer." Lucan nodded. "And the injunction hearing?" I slid the 27 pages back across the desk. "They think a lawsuit is a shield," I said. "It is a subpoena with their names already printed on it." Lucan picked up the complaint. At 10:26 a.m., the legal process began moving in both directions. Beckett thought he had finally forced me into a corner. He had actually given me the court order I needed to open every locked drawer in his life. By Thursday morning, Beckett had found the one audience that did not ask to see the books before forming an opinion. The steps of Mecklenburg County Courthouse were already crowded by 9 a.m. attorneys moved through the front doors carrying briefcases. Clerks stood under the stone columns with paper cups in their hands. A local news crew had set up beside the sidewalk, their camera aimed toward the courthouse seal and the flag moving lightly in the humid Charlotte air. Beckett stood in front of the cameras wearing a charcoal suit that had been pressed more carefully than the one he wore to his own office lockout. Tamsin stood beside him in a cream dress, one hand wrapped around his arm. Garrick remained half a step behind them, positioned just far enough back to look concerned rather than involved. The reporter introduced them as a family facing a bitter business dispute. Beckett looked directly into the camera. "My sister took my company when it was finally becoming successful," he said. "She shut down my accounts, locked me out of my office, and stripped away everything I built." He spoke slowly, giving every sentence time to land. The camera did not show the empty customer database. It did not show the 14 active user accounts, 11 of which were paid testers. It did not show the $58,400 credit line opened with my name at 2:14 in the morning. Tamsin pressed a tissue under one eye. "This has destroyed our life," she said. "Marlo knows how much pressure Beckett has been under. She knows what this has done to our marriage and our mental health, and she still chose to make us homeless." The reporter nodded with the practiced seriousness of someone working toward a clean segment before the morning deadline. Garrick stepped forward when the camera turned toward him. "Marlo was always capable," he said. "Maybe too capable. She has forgotten that businesses are supposed to serve people, especially family." That sentence moved through local television faster than any invoice could. By 10:16 a.m., the clip had been posted by 3 Charlotte area accounts. By 11:30, it had been repeated in a local business blog beneath a headline about a logistics executive accused of cutting off her own family. By noon, the Voss Meridian Media Monitoring dashboard showed 312 mentions across local news, social platforms, reposted video clips, and comment threads. The red graph on the wall screen climbed in jagged steps. At 12:14, I entered the executive boardroom. It was the largest meeting room at Voss Meridian, with a mahogany table that seated 18 people and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the loading yard. Outside, trailers backed into assigned lanes while yard supervisors checked manifests on handheld scanners. Inside, 6 board members were waiting with Lucan. Every phone on the table seemed to be vibrating. One director had a news clip paused on his tablet. Another was reading comments under a reposted video. The screen at the far end of the room showed the monitoring dashboard, with red bars rising beside words like family dispute, misuse of authority, and corporate retaliation. I took my seat at the head of the table. No one spoke for several seconds. Then Martin Eyre, who had been on the board for 5 years and managed risk oversight for 2 regional manufacturers before joining us, cleared his throat. "Our lenders have not called yet," he said. "But 2 clients have asked whether the injunction could affect operating continuity." "It cannot," I said. "Not if we win," he replied. I looked at him. "We are not waiting to win. We are operating under the contracts we already have." Another director, Celine Ward, shifted a stack of papers in front of her. The public story is not favorable, she said. Beckett is presenting himself as a son who was cut off by a powerful sister. Tamsin is presenting herself as someone pushed out of her home. People respond to that before they respond to legal details. They respond to it because it is simple, I said. Celine nodded. And, because it is simple, it could become expensive. The room stayed quiet. Martin leaned forward. Perhaps we should consider a limited settlement. Restore a modest funding arrangement, resolve the civil dispute privately, and prevent the injunction hearing from becoming a larger public event. He did not say the word payoff. He did not need to. The suggestion sat in the center of the table, cleanly wrapped in business language. I reached for the glass of water beside my folder. The condensation was cool against my fingers. I took one drink, set the glass down, and looked around the room. Do you know what they're asking us to settle? I said. Nobody answered. They're asking us to pay them to avoid looking at the records. They want operating funds restored while we have documented unauthorized account use, a forged credit authorization, false vendor classifications, and an active financial crimes case number. Celine glanced toward Lucan. Lucan opened the black folder in front of him. The evidence package is preserved, he said. The account access logs, wire transfer records, dealership documentation, and asset recovery inventory are all certified copies. We have also begun preparing discovery requests connected to their complaint. Martin looked at me. You are confident the evidence will hold? I do not bring evidence to a boardroom because I am confident, I said. I bring it because it is documented. The phones kept vibrating. At 12:31, a client relations manager sent an email asking for talking points. At 12:33, our lender's legal department requested confirmation that the emergency injunction had not been granted. At 12:36, someone reposted Tamsin's interview with the caption, "What kind of sister does this?" They wanted public sympathy because it was the only asset they still possessed. I closed my folder. There will be no settlement, I said. There will be no public statement beyond. Voss Meridian does not comment on pending litigation. Martin frowned slightly. That is all. That is all. Lucan looked toward me. What would you like prepared for the hearing? I stood and walked to the wall screen. The dashboard reflected faintly in the glass, red lines rising over the loading yard below. Keep the media quiet, I said. Build the binder. Every page needs a source, a timestamp, and a chain of custody. Lucan nodded. I turned back toward the board. I do not litigate through headlines, I said. I litigate through records. At 12:42 p.m., the meeting ended. Outside, the company kept moving freight across 3 states. Inside, Lucan began assembling the documents that would make every camera clip irrelevant. By Saturday morning, Tamsin had decided the story needed better lighting. The townhouse at Wexford Glen had floor-to-ceiling windows, white marble counters, and a kitchen designed to make ordinary people feel underdressed. The dining table had been covered with pale roses, crystal champagne flutes, and trays of pastries from a bakery in Myers Park. She invited 8 women from her country club. They arrived in linen dresses, sunglasses, and the cautious confidence of people who came for gossip but wanted to call it concern. Their cars lined the curb outside the townhouse, a row of polished luxury vehicles beneath the flowering trees. Tamsin met them at the door wearing a soft pink blouse and cream trousers. She had spent 40 minutes on her hair. She had selected earrings that made her look delicate rather than expensive. She had practiced the version of herself that people trusted. The brave wife. The woman whose husband had been attacked by a controlling sister. By 11:20, the champagne had been poured. Tamsin stood beside the kitchen island with one hand around her glass while the others listened. Marlowe has always been cold, she said. She thinks money gives her the right to control everyone. A woman named Diane Huxley nodded slowly. And Beckett? How is he holding up? Tamsin lowered her eyes. He is trying. He built something from nothing, and she took it because she could not stand seeing him succeed without her. That part was useful because it was easy to say. It did not require details. Nobody asked to see Harborline's client list. Nobody asked about the company accounts. Nobody asked why Beckett's office had been cleared by corporate security or why his expenses had been frozen without warning. Tamsin continued. She is jealous. She always has been. Beckett has charm. People trust him. Marlowe has never known how to handle that. Several women murmured agreement. One reached across the counter and touched Tamsin's wrist. You should not have to live like this, she said. Tamsin gave a small, exhausted smile. Thank you. We are trying to stay strong. The doorbell rang. Tamsin glanced toward the foyer. That is probably another delivery, she said. People have been sending flowers. She crossed the hall with her champagne glass still in her hand. The front door opened onto a bright morning. A tall man in a gray suit stood on the porch holding a thick legal envelope. His name was Nolan Rusk. He had served civil process in Mecklenburg County for 13 years and had the kind of face that did not change when people became difficult. Are you Tamsin Voss? He asked. She lifted one eyebrow. Yes. He held out the envelope. You have been served. The champagne glass shifted in her hand. For what? Nolan did not answer the question. He simply waited until she took the envelope, then turned and walked back down the front path. The women from the kitchen had gathered behind her. Tamsin closed the door with more force than necessary. It is probably something from the lawsuit, she said. Marlowe's legal team has been sending nonsense all week. She carried the envelope back toward the kitchen island. Everyone watched. The paper was thick and heavy. The county seal pressed through the front page in a raised circle. The envelope made a dry, tearing sound when she opened it. Tamsin pulled out the first document. Her eyes went directly to the heading. Acceleration and foreclosure notice. For 2 seconds, she did not move. Then she turned the page. The document listed the secured balance beneath the trust-backed residence loan. $1,350,000. It listed 19 missed payments. It listed the original payment schedule, the extensions, the cure notices, and the compliance clause that had triggered the acceleration. Fraud-related breach. Unauthorized use of affiliated financial accounts. Material misrepresentation in vendor reporting. Her champagne glass slipped slightly against the marble counter. A thin ring of liquid spilled onto the stone. Diane Huxley leaned forward. Tamsin, what is that? Tamsin turned another page too quickly. It is a technical issue. The next sheet contained the possession timeline. 14 days. 14 days to vacate the townhouse. After that, the lender could request a possession order. If they remained, the Mecklenburg County Sheriff's Office could enforce removal. One of the women looked toward the window, then toward the staircase. I thought you and Beckett owned this house. Tamsin did not answer. The silence answered for her. The townhouse had never been purchased in their names. The family office had acquired it after Beckett could not qualify for traditional financing. Tamsin had known that in the beginning. She had simply learned to speak around it. She called it our home, often enough that eventually people stopped asking who held the note. Now the documents were sitting on the kitchen island where she had arranged imported pastries and champagne. The women read the first page over one another's shoulders. 19 missed payments. A secured balance of $1.35 million. A breach tied to fraud. The room changed. Nobody needed to say it aloud. They had not been invited into the home of a wealthy friend facing a cruel family dispute. They had been invited into a townhouse funded by someone else, occupied by a couple who had stopped paying long before the public story began. One woman picked up her handbag. I should probably go, she said. Another followed. I have an appointment. I need to check on my daughter. The excuses arrived one after another, quiet and polished. No one looked directly at Tamsin while leaving. Within 6 minutes, the kitchen was nearly empty. The roses remained. The pastries remained. The champagne was still cold in the silver bucket beside the counter. Tamsin stood alone with the legal papers spread in front of her. Her phone began to ring. Beckett. She stared at his name until it stopped. Then it rang again. This time, she answered. What did you do? She said. His voice came through fast and strained. I did not know they would do this. You did not know? There are 19 missed payments, Beckett. I thought Marlowe would keep extending them. Tamsin looked down at the page again. 14 days. The number sat in the center of the notice in dark, clean print. She had spent the week telling people Marlowe was trying to make them homeless. Now the proof was on her counter. Marlowe had not taken their home. They had been living in it on borrowed time. The night before the injunction hearing, Voss Meridian's executive floor was lit by only 3 offices and the conference room at the end of the hall. Charlotte had gone dark beyond the windows. Freight moved through the loading yard below in slow, measured lines. A yard supervisor crossed between trailers wearing a reflective vest, his clipboard held against the wind. Inside, the building smelled like coffee, paper, and the cold toner scent that comes from printers running for too many hours. Lucan and Elodie had been in the conference room since 6:30 p.m. By 9:14, the black binder sat in the center of the table. Its cover read, Voss Meridian Compliance Record. The binder weighed a little more than 2 pounds. Its leather spine was black, smooth, and stiff from being new. 58 numbered tabs divided the contents into separate sections. The pages inside were organized by date, source, chain of custody, and relevance to the civil complaint. Nothing in it depended on memory. Nothing in it depended on anyone believing me. I stood at the table with one hand resting on the cover while Elodie checked the final exhibit list. Exhibit 47, she said. Harborline access records, including the January archive downloads and the February after-hours logins. Lucan marked the line with his pen. Exhibit 48, Elodie continued. The forged emergency line of credit authorization, including the signature comparison prepared from 7 verified originals. I opened the tab. The forged authorization was printed on heavy legal stock. My name appeared in the signature box at the bottom of the second page. At a glance, it looked close enough. That was the point. Beside it sat the verified samples from my mortgage refinance, vendor agreements, and corporate banking file. Elodie's analysis showed the differences in pressure pattern, stroke order, and the way the letter M ended too sharply in the forged version. A signature can look familiar without being real. Exhibit 49, she said. The banking sequence. The next section contained the entire transfer path. The line of credit opened at 2:14 a.m. The money moved to a holding account at 9:32 a.m. The dealership wire posted at 3:48 p.m. The vehicle delivery was confirmed 2 days later. There was no missing link. There was no harmless explanation waiting in the margins. Lucan moved down the exhibit list. 50 through 53 are the false vendor invoices, card misuse records, hotel charges, private dining invoices, and the vehicle lease files. 54 is the Harborline lease addendum, Elodie said. Section 14.3 has been highlighted. The clause was simple. Fraud against a principal or affiliated beneficiary triggered immediate termination. It allowed asset recovery, suspension of funding, and immediate removal of access privileges. Beckett's lawsuit claimed I had locked him out without cause. The addendum showed that he had signed the terms long before he used my name to open credit. At 9:28 p.m., Morel entered the conference room. She wore a navy coat over a black dress, and she carried a sealed document envelope against her chest. Her hair was pulled back neatly. She had not worn jewelry except her wedding ring, though even that seemed to sit differently on her hand now. I had this notarized, she said. She placed the envelope beside the binder. Inside was her sworn statement, signed before a notary public at 4:41 that afternoon. It confirmed that she had no knowledge of the fraudulent line of credit, no role in the SUV purchase, and no awareness that Beckett had accessed my historical files. Lucan checked the seal. Thank you, Morel. My mother looked at the binder. That is everything? It is everything we need for tomorrow's hearing, I said. She ran 2 fingers over the black leather cover. The movement was small, but I understood it. For years, my mother had wanted disputes handled quietly. She had believed that privacy kept a family intact. She had confused silence with peace because silence was easier to live beside. But the records had taught her what I had learned much earlier. Silence does not repair dishonesty. It gives dishonesty a private room to grow. My phone vibrated against the table. The message came from Detective Sloan Barrett. Financial Crimes Division has received the criminal referral. Investigation remains active. We cannot comment publicly on any investigative details. I showed Lucan the screen. He nodded once. That is enough confirmation for the court to understand there is a parallel process, he said. We will not speculate beyond that. We do not need to, I said. The documents already spoke. Morel moved to the window and looked down at the loading yard. A truck backed into a dock. The gate lifted. Another shipment moved through the system because someone had followed the rules written for it. Lucan closed the binder. Quinn Harlow's office called this afternoon, he said. They asked whether you would consider a private settlement before the hearing. Elodie looked up from the exhibit list. What were they offering? Nothing specific, Lucan said. They want to discuss restoration of some access, a limited support payment, and mutual confidentiality. I sat down at the table. For several seconds, I looked at the sealed statement my mother had brought and the fraudulent signature in Exhibit 48. I had spent too many years cleaning up messes in private because I thought privacy was kindness. It had only made them bolder. They had cameras outside the courthouse, I said. They called me jealous. They called Beckett's office a company. They told strangers that I destroyed their lives. Lucan waited. I turned the binder toward him. There will be no private settlement. Marlowe, he said carefully, public hearings can be unpredictable. So can stolen money, I replied. Elodie closed her laptop. What do you want the courtroom to see first? The authorization, I said. Then the transfer path. Then the lease addendum. Let the sequence speak before anyone tries to interrupt it. Lucan nodded and picked up the binder. I looked at the dark windows, where my reflection stood over the table beside 58 tabs of proof. They chose an audience, I said. Tomorrow, they can meet the evidence in front of one. At 9:46 p.m., Lucan locked the binder inside the fireproof cabinet beside the conference room door. The hearing was scheduled for 9 o'clock the next morning. By then, every lie they had told would have a page number. The commercial and probate courtroom on the 5th floor of Mecklenburg County Courthouse had no softness in it. The benches were oak, darkened by decades of hands resting on their edges. The ceiling lights were too white. The air smelled of old paper, floor polish, and the faint mineral scent that followed every rainstorm into a public building. At 8:41 a.m., Lucan and I walked through the courtroom doors with Morel beside us. Lucan carried the black compliance binder in a plain leather case. Morel held no folder at all. She had already signed what she needed to sign, and she had learned that morning that nothing becomes stronger because you keep repeating it. Across the aisle, Beckett, Tamsin, and Garrick were seated at the plaintiff's table. They had chosen the seats closest to the center of the room. Beckett wore a dark suit and a tie with a subtle blue pattern, the kind he favored when he wanted people to assume a meeting had gone well. His hair was combed carefully. His posture suggested he was trying to look like a founder rather than a man whose office had been emptied 2 days earlier. Tamsin wore a structured designer dress in deep green, with a small gold bracelet resting against her wrist. The dress had probably cost more than a month of their townhouse payment. She looked polished enough that nobody entering the courtroom would have guessed an acceleration and foreclosure notice was sitting on her kitchen counter. Garrick sat between them, his shoulders squared and his hands folded over the handle of his cane. He looked toward me once, then away, as though he were still deciding whether silence might force me to become reasonable again. Quinn Harlow stood beside them, sorting papers into uneven stacks. He had brought 3 expanding folders, 2 legal pads, and a cardboard document box with handwritten labels along the side. Every few seconds, he flipped through a section too quickly, the paper edges whispering against one another as he searched for something he should have found the night before. Lucan watched him for a moment. He did not receive the full record, he said quietly. No, I said. He received the story they thought could replace it. We took our seats. The bailiff entered at 8:56, followed by Judge Arden Vale at 9 o'clock exactly. Judge Vale was in his late 60s, narrow-faced, silver-haired, and known throughout Mecklenburg County for disliking 2 things with equal consistency: people who treated court as theater, and wealthy families who expected private resentment to become public authority. He sat down, adjusted his glasses, and reviewed the plaintiff's emergency injunction request. The papers in front of him were thick, heavily tabbed, and visibly rushed. Quinn had filed them only 48 hours earlier. The blue stamp from the clerk's office stood near the top page. Judge Vale read in silence for nearly a minute. Then he looked over the rim of his glasses. "Mr. Harlow," he said, "you are asking this court to freeze operating assets of a logistics company with existing employees, active client contracts, and regional distribution obligations." "Yes, Your Honor," Quinn said. "The requested relief is limited and necessary to prevent further irreparable harm." Limited relief that freezes corporate assets is an unusual definition of limited, Judge Vale said. Quinn smiled carefully. "My clients have suffered a severe and immediate loss of livelihood." The judge looked back at the filing. "Then explain it." Quinn stepped forward. He began with the story Beckett and Tamsin had already given the cameras. Mr. Beckett Voss is an entrepreneur who built an independent startup with his own vision and labor. His sister, Marlo Voss, used her control over family resources and affiliated business accounts to remove him from his office, terminate his support structure, and strip him of the business he was preparing to grow. Beckett sat straighter. Tamsin lowered her eyes at the proper moments. Garrick kept his jaw set. Quinn continued. "My client has been stripped of his livelihood by a sister who mistook family generosity for corporate ownership." The phrase settled into the room exactly as he intended. I watched Judge Vale's expression. It did not change. Quinn moved to the second part of the request. Ms. Voss also shut off cards, vendor access, and financial support relied upon by the plaintiffs for ordinary family obligations. She did so without meaningful notice, without a fair internal process, and with apparent intent to pressure Mr. Voss into abandoning his independent venture. Lucan's pen made one quiet mark on his legal pad. Quinn held up a copy of the civil complaint. "We are requesting an emergency injunction requiring restoration of office access, operational funding, vendor accounts, and a protected portion of Voss Meridian assets pending resolution of this dispute." Judge Vale leaned back. "Your complaint alleges wrongful termination. Was Mr. Voss an employee of Voss Meridian?" Quinn glanced toward Beckett. "He operated under a family business arrangement that functioned as employment in substance." "Was there an employment agreement?" "There were verbal commitments, budget approvals, and an established course of support." Judge Vale's eyes narrowed slightly. "Those are not the same things." Tamsin's fingers tightened around her handbag. Beckett looked across the courtroom at me. He had the expression he wore whenever he expected a difficult conversation to end with me fixing it. He still believed I would choose a settlement over public scrutiny. He still believed the company's reputation would matter more to me than the truth. They had rehearsed their grief. They had not prepared for the documents that would explain it. Judge Vale turned toward Lucan. "Counsel for the defendants," he said. "Do you wish to respond before I consider the emergency request?" Lucan stood. He placed one hand on the leather case holding the black binder. "Yes, Your Honor," he said. "We do." The courtroom became still. I looked once at Beckett, Tamsin, and Garrick across the aisle. For the first time that morning, none of them looked certain about what would happen next. Lucan did not begin by answering Quinn Harlow's story. He did not mention the courthouse cameras, the local news segment, or the words Beckett and Tamsin had chosen because they sounded clean when repeated by strangers. He did not argue about family loyalty, emotional damage, or the private meals that had somehow become proof of public cruelty. He stood beside our table, placed one hand on the black leather case, and looked directly at Judge Arden Vale. "Mr. Voss was not an employee terminated from Voss Meridian Logistics," Lucan said. "He was a tenant under a conditional office use agreement and a beneficiary of limited family office support, both of which contained written compliance provisions." Quinn rose immediately. "Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is making accusations that are not relevant to the emergency relief before this court." Judge Vale did not look at him right away. "Mr. Mercer, are these provisions part of the record?" "Yes, Your Honor. They are attached to our response and supported by certified financial documentation." Only then did the judge look toward Quinn. "Overruled for the moment. I am deciding whether to compel a company to restore access and funding. The reason that access was terminated is relevant." "Proceed." Lucan opened the case. The black binder came out slowly. It made no dramatic sound. The leather cover touched the counsel table with a soft, solid weight. The bailiff stepped forward when Lucan nodded, took 3 prepared copies, and carried one to Judge Vale, one to Quinn, and one to the plaintiff's table. The red tabs were visible from across the room. 58 of them. Each tab had a number printed in black. Quinn accepted his copy without looking at it. Beckett took the binder on his side of the table and set it between himself and Tamsin. Garrick leaned toward it, one hand resting near the edge as though he did not want to touch it yet. Lucan opened his own copy. "Exhibit 1, he said. The courtroom was quiet enough that the paper could be heard when he turned the first red tab. An emergency line of credit authorization for $58,400, submitted at 2:14 a.m. on February 6 through the Voss family office portal. Judge Vale looked down at the page. Lucan continued. The document carries Ms. Marlo Voss's name, personal identification data, and a signature that appears similar to hers. Ms. Voss did not sign it. The authorization was created against her collateral reserve. Quinn's eyes moved to the document. That is an allegation, he said. It is a comparison, Lucan replied. The next page contains 7 verified signatures obtained from corporate banking records, refinance documents, and vendor agreements. The signature on the authorization differs in stroke sequence, terminal pressure, and letter formation. Judge Vale flipped to the comparison page. Garrick looked down at the forged signature. His fingers stopped moving. For the first time since the hearing began, his face lost its practiced patience. Lucan opened the second tab. Exhibit 2. Access and Internet Protocol logs from Harborline Systems leased office suite. Quinn shifted in place. These are internal technical records, he said. They have not been authenticated. They have been certified by the building network administrator and preserved by Voss Meridian's compliance system, Lucan said. The same logs were produced in the plaintiff's own emergency filing because they claim the suite was improperly locked. Judge Vale raised one hand. Continue, Mr. Mercer. Lucan read from the page. On February 5 at 11:46 p.m., Beckett Voss's assigned device accessed the archived refinance folder containing Ms. Voss's historical identification documents and verified signature samples. At 12:18 a.m., a file package was downloaded. At 2:14 a.m., the line of credit request was submitted from the same device family, using the same office network address. The timestamps were printed in a narrow column. The routing information sat beside them. There was nothing elegant about it. That was why it worked. Beckett's smile had disappeared. He looked at Quinn, then at the red tab, then at the page in front of him. Tamsin lowered her eyes, both hands folded around her handbag. Garrick still stared at the signature, as though the longer he looked, the more likely it was to become someone else's. Lucan turned another page. Exhibit 3. The transfer path and dealership purchase record. The bailiff moved closer to Judge Vale's bench, ready in case the court needed the enlarged exhibit display. Lucan did not need it yet. The credit line funded at 9:32 a.m. on February 6. At 3:48 p.m., $56,900 was wired to Kingsley Motor Gallery in South Charlotte. The remaining $1,500 was used for registration and insurance processing. He paused briefly. The purchaser listed on the dealership invoice was Tamsin Voss. Tamsin looked up. That vehicle is mine, she said. Her voice carried farther than she intended. Judge Vale looked at her. Ms. Voss, you will speak through counsel. Tamsin pressed her lips together. Lucan continued. The vehicle was a metallic gray sport utility vehicle with cream interior, delivered 2 days later. The down payment originated from a credit line opened using Ms. Marlo Voss's identity and collateral reserve. Quinn reached for his binder, flipping pages too quickly now. The paper made a dry, nervous rustle. He found the invoice. Then he stopped. Lucan moved to the fourth tab. Exhibit 4. Company card misuse records and false vendor classifications. He read the categories one by one. Resort stays in Cabo and Positano, marked as industry research. Boutique purchases in Buckhead entered as client gifts. Private dining invoices labeled partnership meetings. Hotel charges submitted as business development. Vehicle-related expenses coded under vendor conference services. The list went on for 2 more pages. Each charge had a date. Each charge had a merchant. Each charge had an approval route. Each charge had a record showing where the money came from. I watched my brother discover what truth looks like when it is numbered, dated, and impossible to interrupt. Quinn finally stood again. Your Honor, this is becoming a criminal accusation disguised as a response to a civil injunction. Lucan closed Exhibit 4 but kept one hand on the page. That is correct in one respect, he said. There is a criminal referral under review by Mecklenburg County Financial Crimes Division. We are not asking this court to decide criminal liability today. Judge Vale looked at him. Then what are you asking this court to decide? That the plaintiffs are not entitled to emergency funding or restored access while the evidence shows material breach, misuse of authorization, and a documented financial irregularity tied directly to the privileges they seek to recover. Lucan looked toward Beckett, then toward the judge. This injunction is not a request for justice. It is a request for the court to finance the aftermath of their fraud. No one spoke after that. The words settled over the courtroom, heavy and precise. Beckett kept his eyes on the binder. Tamsin's bracelet had stopped catching the light. Garrick looked from the forged signature to me, and I saw the moment he understood that the documents did not care what he had wanted to believe. Judge Arden Vale did not speak after Lucan finished. He pulled the black binder closer and read in silence. The courtroom waited with him. A page turned. Then another. The sound was small, but it filled the room because nobody else moved. Quinn Harlow stood beside the plaintiff's table with one hand braced against the polished wood. Tamsin had stopped looking at anyone. Beckett kept his eyes on the red tabs, as though he could find an explanation somewhere between the numbered exhibits. Judge Vale reached Exhibit 2 again. He read the access log line by line. February 5th, 11:46 p.m. Beckett's assigned device entered the archived refinance folder. February 6th, 12:18 a.m. The file package containing my prior signature samples was downloaded. February 6th, 2:14 a.m. The emergency credit request was submitted from the same device family and office network. The judge lifted his eyes. Mr. Voss, he said, do you dispute that the device assigned to you accessed these records? Beckett rose halfway from his chair. I did not submit any forged document, he said. I used the office computers. Everyone did. I did not know what someone else might have access through them. Lucan stood again. Your Honor, may I direct the court to Exhibit 22? Judge Vale gave a short nod. Lucan opened the section behind the next red tab. An email thread between Beckett Voss and Harborline's operations mailbox. On February 5th at 11:51 p.m., Mr. Voss forwarded himself the archive file path. At 12:21 a.m., he sent a message titled, Use the old profile package. The attachment is the same data folder later used to populate the emergency credit request. Quinn's head turned sharply toward Beckett. Beckett did not look at him. Lucan continued. At 3:53 p.m. on February 6th, 5 minutes after the dealership wire posted, Mr. Voss sent a text to Tamsin Voss stating, the approval cleared. Go pick the color you wanted. That message is preserved in Exhibit 23. The courtroom held its breath without anyone saying so. Beckett's face had lost all color. That was not about a loan, he said. That was about other funding. Judge Vale looked back at the page. Then you may explain that distinction to the appropriate investigators, he said. Tamsin stood next. Her chair made a soft scrape against the floor. I did not know where the money came from, she said. Beckett told me the company was doing better. The SUV was a gift. I received a gift from my husband. I did not open any line of credit. Judge Vale's expression did not change. Ms. Voss, the dealership invoice names you as purchaser. The delivery record contains your signature. The vehicle registration lists your address. The down payment is traceable to an account opened through an unauthorized use of Ms. Voss's identity. Tamsin's fingers closed around the edge of the table. I did not know it was unauthorized. You accepted the benefit, Judge Vale said. A beneficiary cannot receive the proceeds of fraud, enjoy them publicly, and then claim innocence only after the records appear. Quinn stepped forward. Your Honor, my clients may have made mistakes, but this is still a civil matter. The emergency relief should be considered separately from any allegations that have not been adjudicated. Judge Vale closed the binder. The sound of the cover striking the table was heavy. Mr. Harlow, your clients asked this court to compel Voss Meridian Logistics to restore funding, account access, office space, vehicle support, and operating privileges. They asked me to interfere with a lawful company's assets while evidence before me shows those privileges may have been used to facilitate identity theft, fraudulent inducement, and unauthorized financial transfers. He looked toward Beckett. Mr. Voss alleges wrongful termination, yet the contract you signed permits immediate termination for fraud against a principal or affiliated beneficiary. Then he looked at Tamsin. Ms. Voss alleges financial harm, yet the records identify her as the recipient of a vehicle purchased through a credit line opened in another person's name. Finally, he turned toward Garrick. Garrick had not spoken since Exhibit 1. His cane rested against the table. One of his hands covered the other, but the skin across his knuckles had gone pale. Judge Vale continued. This court will not freeze a lawful company to preserve an unlawful lifestyle. The gavel struck the block. The sound was sharp and dry. The plaintiff's emergency injunction request is denied. The complaint is dismissed with prejudice based on the record presently before the court and the plaintiff's failure to establish any likelihood of success on the merits. Tamsin made a faint sound beside Beckett. Quinn looked down at his papers. The neat confidence he had carried into the courtroom had disappeared. His folders were still open, but the pages inside no longer had anywhere useful to go. Judge Vale addressed the bailiff. Take custody of the Voss Meridian compliance record. The clerk will preserve certified copies and transmit the fraud referral, including the identified exhibits, to Mecklenburg County Financial Crimes Division. The bailiff stepped forward. Lucan handed over the binder without hesitation. Judge Vale looked at the court reporter. Let the record reflect that the evidence indicates potential identity theft, wire fraud, fraudulent inducement, and misuse of affiliated financial accounts. I am making no criminal finding today. I am directing preservation and referral. Quinn cleared his throat. Your Honor, in light of these developments, I need to state for the record that I am withdrawing from representation effective immediately. Beckett turned toward him. You cannot leave now. Quinn gathered his folders. I cannot continue based on information that was not disclosed to me. That is not what I asked, Beckett said. But Quinn was already moving backward from the table. Garrick looked at me across the courtroom. He did not look angry anymore. He looked like a man sorting through years of choices and realizing that he had called them family because the alternative was admitting he had allowed his daughter to become the emergency reserve for everyone else's failures. He had not protected the family from me. He had allowed the family to break me in private and expected me to keep paying for the pieces. The room did not erupt. It simply became very quiet because consequences rarely need applause. Judge Vale rose from the bench. The bailiff called the courtroom to order as the judge left through the side door. Lucan gathered our remaining files. Morel touched my elbow once, lightly. I picked up my coat, straightened the cuff at my wrist, and walked out without looking back. Quinn Harlow left the courtroom carrying his cardboard document box against his chest. He did not look at Beckett when he passed him. The courtroom doors swung shut behind Quinn with a dull wooden sound, leaving Beckett, Tamsin, and Garrick in the marble corridor outside commercial and probate court. Their folders had slipped from the plaintiff's table during the hearing. Pages were scattered near the benches, some face up, some folded beneath the feet of courthouse visitors, moving carefully around them. A woman waiting for a probate hearing stepped over the edge of the complaint without reading it. A man in a gray suit paused near the vending machines, recognized Beckett from the news clip, and then kept walking. Beckett crouched to gather the pages. His hands were unsteady. Tamsin stood several feet away, holding her handbag against her side. The designer dress she had worn for court still fit perfectly. Her bracelet still caught the hallway lights. But the careful version of herself from the morning had gone missing somewhere between the forged signature and Judge Vale's ruling. Beckett collected the last loose page and stood. We need to go home, he said. We need to sit down and figure out what we are doing. Tamsin laughed once. It was not a warm sound. Home. Beckett looked at her. We have 14 days. We can appeal the foreclosure process. We can find another lawyer. We can talk to Dad. You are still saying there is something left to plan. Tamsin. She looked down the corridor, toward the courthouse entrance where people were coming and going beneath the security cameras. We do not have a home, Beckett. We have a foreclosure notice, a criminal referral, and a townhouse we were never qualified to keep. Garrick stood nearby with one hand on his cane. He did not interrupt. For most of my life, he had been able to settle a room just by clearing his throat. That morning, the sound would not have changed anything. Beckett took a step closer to Tamsin. I did what I had to do, he said. I was trying to build something. No, she said. You were trying to look like someone who had built something. His jaw tightened. That is not fair. Fair. She turned toward him fully. You told me Harbor Line would make us independent. You said the office, the travel, the dinners, and the car were the beginning of the life we were supposed to have. You told me your sister had more money than she could ever spend, and that she would keep supporting the family because she needed us to need her. Beckett looked toward the floor. I never said she needed us. You did not have to. The corridor went quiet around them. Lucan and I had stepped out of the courtroom by then. He carried the thin folder that remained after the bailiff took custody of the black binder. I stopped near the wall without speaking. Nothing about that moment required my involvement. Beckett lifted his hands. Everything I did was for us, he said. You wanted the life. You wanted the SUV. You wanted the trips. You wanted people to see us as successful. Tamsin's face changed. Not softer. Clearer. You are right, she said. I wanted all of it. She took one slow breath. But I married a future I thought your sister would keep paying for. Beckett stared at her. The words landed harder than any accusation Quinn had tried to make in court because they had no legal language around them. No one could object. No one could reframe them. Tamsin had said exactly what their marriage had been built on. Garrick's eyes closed briefly. Beckett reached for Tamsin's hand. She pulled it away. I can explain, he said. You explained enough. She looked down at her left hand. The diamond ring had been purchased 18 months earlier through a Voss Meridian vendor account. The charge had been coded as client relationship development. Elodie had traced it during the Project Lantern audit, but Lucan had held the invoice back from the courtroom binder because the 4 exhibits were enough to defeat the injunction. Tamsin twisted the ring once. Then she pulled it off. The diamond struck the marble with a thin metallic sound. It rolled past Beckett's shoe, caught the reflection of the overhead lights, and came to rest beside the corner of the legal complaint he had filed against me. Beckett looked down at it. Tamsin, do not do this. I am filing for divorce, she said. And I am speaking with counsel about a cooperation agreement. His head lifted sharply. You would cooperate against me? I will cooperate with the truth, she said. That is the first thing you should have done. Garrick finally spoke. Tamsin, this is not the time. She turned toward him. No, Mr. Voss. This is exactly the time. The money is gone. The office is gone. The townhouse is gone. There is no reason left to pretend this family was ever stable. Garrick did not answer. He looked at Beckett, then at the ring on the floor. His face had the hollow stillness of someone finally seeing the structure he had helped create. He had praised Beckett for confidence. He had treated budgets as birthrights. He had watched Tamsin spend money that did not belong to her and called it family support because it was easier than asking questions. He could not protect Beckett now. Not from the court. Not from Tamsin. Not from the evidence. Beckett bent down and picked up the ring. He held it in his palm for a moment, staring at the diamond as if it might tell him which part of the story had gone wrong. I walked past him with Lucan. I did not stop. I did not offer a final warning or a better version of the truth. I had already given them both in documents, deadlines, and signed notices. Some people call it betrayal when a person leaves them. I called it the final proof that there had never been loyalty there. The rain began just after midnight. By 12:37 a.m., it was hitting the windows of my security study in steady sheets, turning the lawn beyond the glass into a dark, moving blur. The house sat behind an iron gate at the end of a long drive in Charlotte, far enough from the road that most people could not see the lights unless they were looking for them. I was at the desk reviewing the court preservation order when the perimeter system gave a low chime. Camera gate, 02. The monitor came alive in green-gray night vision. Beckett stood outside the gate. Rain ran down his face and darkened the shoulders of his navy suit. He had no umbrella. His hair was flattened against his forehead. The tailored jacket he wore to court that morning now hung heavy and loose, soaked through at the seams. The SUV was gone. The car he had driven for nearly 2 years had been leased through one of the company programs. When Lucan froze the vehicle accounts, the leasing company had recovered it before sunset. Beckett stepped closer to the camera. "Marlowe," he said into the intercom panel. "I know you can hear me." I did not answer. I watched the rain strike the camera lens. Each drop smeared the image for half a second before sliding away. The gate lights cast pale circles across the wet driveway, and Beckett stood inside none of them. Behind me, the study door opened. Morel came in wearing a dark robe over her nightgown. She had heard the alert through the upstairs panel. Garrick followed a moment later, his cane in one hand and his expression already fixed with the kind of concern that had always arrived after consequences, never before them. He looked at the screen. "Open the gate," he said. Morel did not speak. I turned the volume up. Beckett pressed both hands against the iron bars. "Tamsin left," he said. "She took a bag and called someone. I do not know where she went." His voice was rough, but the intercom still carried every word clearly. "My cards are declined. I cannot get a hotel. The accounts are all gone. I have nowhere to sleep tonight." Garrick stepped closer to my desk. "He is your brother." "I know who he is," I said. Beckett looked toward the camera again. "Please let me in. I can sleep in the old room. I do not need anything else. I will work. I will do whatever you need me to do. I can help around the house, help at the company, anything." The old room. He meant the guest room above the garage, where he had stayed during college breaks before he learned to treat every open door as proof that someone else owed him a key. I placed my hand on the intercom button, but did not press it yet. Morel stood beside the monitor, her face reflected faintly in the dark glass. She had spent the day reading court orders, financial records, and the sworn statements that followed the hearing. She had not asked me to forgive him. She had not asked me to pretend that a wetsuit erased a forged signature. Beckett's voice rose. "I will pay it back." I pressed the button. The rain filled the room through the speaker before I spoke. "You will pay what back?" "The $58,400, he said quickly. "I will repay all of it. I can sell things. I can get a job. I can make payments. Just withdraw the complaint." "You mean the criminal referral?" "Yes. Whatever it is. Please." I did not mean for any of this to happen. Garrick looked at me. "He is asking for help." I looked at the monitor. Beckett had both hands gripping the gate now. His sleeves were dripping. Water collected in the folds of his jacket and fell in steady drops to the pavement. Then he said, "Marlowe, please." The house grew quiet. I thought about Aurelia House. The white linen tablecloth. The soft jazz. Tamsin's finger pointing toward me while Elias stood beside the table with the check folio in his hand. "We are not paying for her." My father had heard it. My father had nodded. I pressed the intercom button again. "At the restaurant," I said, "Tamsin told the waiter, we're not paying for her." Beckett closed his eyes. "Marlowe, that was Tamsin." Dad agreed. You stayed silent. Mom was expected to smile through it. Then all of you waited for me to pay anyway. No one thought it would become this. That night, you all decided I could stand alone. Tonight, I agree. Garrick's mouth tightened. "Marlowe, enough." I turned toward him. "No. Enough was 18 months ago, when Beckett accessed my files. Enough was when he used my name to open credit. Enough was when Tamsin drove that vehicle to your house, and you accepted the story without asking where the money came from." Garrick looked away from me. On the monitor, Beckett lowered his head. "I made a mistake," he said. "You made a sequence of decisions," I replied. Each one had a date, a device, and a record. Morel finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, but it did not bend. "You need to leave, Beckett." He looked up. "Mom, you need to leave," she repeated. "You can speak with your attorney when one is assigned. You can respond to the investigation through the proper process. But you are not coming into this house tonight." For a moment, He stood completely still. Then he looked at Garrick. Our father did not move toward the controls. He did not ask me again. He stood beside the desk with his cane against the floor, watching the son he had defended become a figure on a security screen. Beckett stepped back from the gate. The rain continued to fall. Forgiveness without accountability is not grace. It is permission. I turned off the intercom. Then I closed the security monitor. The screen went black, and the house became quiet again. The investigation took 11 weeks. Financial Crimes Division did not move at the speed of family arguments. Detective Sloan Barrett's team requested records through formal channels, matched device identifiers against building network logs, and compared every transfer against the supporting invoices that had been buried beneath vendor descriptions. The work happened in plain rooms with fluorescent lights, secured file cabinets, and people who did not care whether Beckett had once been called promising. They cared about the sequence. The archived signature package downloaded from his office device. The emergency line of credit opened at 2:14 a.m. The temporary holding account funded at 9:32 a.m. The dealership wire sent at 3:48 p.m. The metallic gray SUV delivered 2 days later. Then came the secondary records. The resort invoices coded as industry research. The designer purchases entered as client gifts. The private dining charges filed as partnership meetings. The hotel payments marked business development. Each transaction had a merchant, a date, an authorization path, and a person who benefited from it. By the time the grand jury received the evidence, the story Beckett had told at the courthouse had become a stack of facts with no room left for performance. The indictment was filed on a Tuesday morning in late August. Identity theft, wire fraud, corporate embezzlement. There were 6 counts in total, each tied to a separate transaction or access event. The clerk's office posted the docket before noon. By 1 o'clock, the same local reporters who had filmed Beckett outside the courthouse were asking his public defender for comment. He did not have a private attorney anymore. Quinn Harlow had withdrawn at the hearing, and the lawyers Beckett contacted afterward asked to see the compliance record before taking his call. Once they saw the access logs, the credit authorization, and the dealership wire receipt, their retainers became numbers he could no longer afford. The legal bills alone had consumed what remained in his personal accounts. His public defender, a woman named Dana Pritchard, met him before arraignment in a narrow interview room beside the criminal courtroom. She had handled financial crimes cases for 12 years and spoke with the efficiency of someone who had learned not to decorate bad news. Lucan told me about the meeting later because Dana had requested certified copies of several exhibits through the court's preservation order. She explained the exposure clearly, he said. We were sitting in Lucan's office at Voss Meridian. His desk held a single file tray, a brass lamp, and a mug of black coffee that had gone cold hours earlier. The afternoon sun reached across the carpet, cutting the room into bright and shadowed sections. What did she tell him? I asked. Lucan opened the case update on his screen. She told him the electronic record is unusually direct. The device trail is direct. The financial benefit is direct. The account access was documented under his credentials. I looked at the screen. And the plea? He has been offered one. Tamsin had already been questioned twice. Detective Barrett's team asked her about the SUV, the boutique purchases, and the resort trips. They asked when she learned where the money came from. They asked why she signed the vehicle delivery documents while the down payment originated from an account opened under my name. She did not receive immunity. She received an attorney and a list of questions that became harder every time the investigators placed another invoice on the table. Her cooperation agreement, if one was reached, would depend on whether she told the truth before the evidence forced her to. Garrick tried to help Beckett in the first weeks after the indictment. He contacted a private defense firm and offered to use personal assets as collateral for a retainer. The firm ordered a preliminary asset search before accepting the engagement. That was when he discovered how much of his own life had already been pledged. The Lake Norman real estate failure had not disappeared because I paid down the original debt. Several residual liens remained tied to old guarantees, deferred tax obligations, and the defaulted residence loan connected to Wexford Glen. His brokerage account had value, but not enough. His remaining property interest was encumbered. The watch he wore to dinner had been sold years earlier. The one he had offered to the world as proof of success had been funded through credit he no longer controlled. For once, there was no asset left that could be turned into a rescue. Beckett accepted the plea agreement in October. It was 16 pages long. Lucan forwarded the secured PDF to me at 4:18 p.m. on the day it was entered. I opened it after the last operations meeting had ended, while freight manifests moved across my second monitor and the loading yard outside began to empty. The agreement required Beckett to plead guilty to reduced counts in exchange for probation instead of a longer prison sentence. It required financial disclosure. It required ongoing cooperation. It required monthly restitution. The repayment schedule began with $1,250 per month, subject to review if he obtained employment or received any settlement, inheritance, or asset transfer above $5,000. The funds were allocated between my collateral reserve, Voss Meridian Logistics, and the financial institutions that had processed the fraudulent credit line. His signature was on the final page. Thin. Uneven. Nothing like the version he had copied from my old files. Lucan called me 10 minutes later. He is not paying for a mistake, he said. He is paying for every decision that made the mistake possible. I looked at the monthly schedule again. The figures were modest compared with what had been taken. The purpose was not to make the loss disappear. It was to ensure that each month carried a record of what he had done. Has sentencing been scheduled? I asked. November 14th. I will not be there. Lucan was quiet for a moment. Understood. I did not need to watch him be sentenced. The documents had already said everything that mattered. I closed the PDF, returned to the freight report, and approved a route adjustment for a delayed carrier in Greensboro. Outside my window, the last trailer cleared the gate. The company moved forward because somebody had finally stopped asking it to carry people who refused to stand on their own. The SUV left first. At 8:11 on a cold Monday morning, 2 repo agents arrived at Wexford Glen in a white tow truck with amber lights flashing against the row of brick townhouses. The metallic gray SUV sat in the driveway beneath a thin layer of leaves, clean enough to look untouched, though its registration file had been marked for preservation after Detective Barrett's team tied the down payment to the fraudulent credit line. One agent photographed the vehicle identification number through the windshield. The second attached the wheel lift. Tamsin was already gone. She had left 4 days earlier with 2 suitcases, a garment bag, and a friend from the country club who waited in an idling sedan at the curb. The only things she left behind were 3 cardboard boxes in the guest room, a set of untouched champagne flutes, and divorce papers placed on the kitchen island beside the foreclosure notice. Beckett watched the SUV roll backward into the street. He stood in the driveway wearing a hooded sweatshirt and jeans, his hands in his pockets. The tow truck's hydraulic system groaned as the front wheels rose from the pavement. Then the vehicle that had once arrived with a satin bow disappeared past the corner. The neighborhood did not react loudly. A woman walking a dog slowed near the mailbox cluster. A man in a golf shirt stood on his front porch with a coffee mug in his hand. 2 children waited for the school bus across the street, whispering to each other as the tow truck turned out of Wexford Glen. The second notice arrived at 9:04. It had already been served once, but the 14-day compliance period had expired at midnight. The possession order was taped to the glass panel beside the front door, where the paper shifted slightly every time the wind moved through the covered entryway. At 10:30, 2 sheriff deputies arrived. They parked behind a small moving truck Beckett had rented with a debit card that still had enough money for a one-day hold. The deputies wore dark uniforms and spoke with the restrained tone of people who had carried out the same procedure in neighborhoods far less polished than Wexford Glen. One of them showed Beckett the order. "The property is no longer yours to occupy," the deputy said. "The compliance period has expired. You need to remove your personal belongings and leave the premises today." Beckett looked at the paper. "It is my house." The deputy did not argue. "The residence was held through a trust-backed loan. The lender has obtained possession through the court. You may remove personal items only. Fixtures, furnishings purchased through the family office, and any property identified in the asset list must remain. The words made the townhouse smaller. The kitchen island. The leather sectional. The dining table beneath the chandelier. The framed art Tamsin had ordered through an interior designer. None of it belonged to Beckett. Most of it had been paid through accounts that no longer existed for him. He began with the closet upstairs. There were expensive jackets, unworn dress shirts, shoes lined in boxes, and 3 sets of luggage that had traveled more than his company ever had. He placed clothes into black trash bags because the moving truck had only given him 6 cartons with the rental. The bags filled quickly. The house did not. By noon, he had moved a desk lamp, a framed college photograph, kitchen utensils, books, and 2 boxes of old files into the truck. His personal life took up less space than the living room furniture he had spent years showing to guests. At 12:47, a storage company representative met him at a low-cost facility off South Boulevard. The unit was 5 by 10 feet. The hallway smelled of dust, concrete, and old cardboard. The overhead lights flickered when the rolling door opened. Beckett slid the first box inside, then another. By the time he finished, his belongings formed a narrow wall against the back. A plastic key tag hung from the lock. Unit 214. Monthly rent due on the 1st. He stood outside the storage unit for a while after the door came down. There was nowhere to sit. At 2:18, he returned to Wexford Glen for the last bag. The sheriff deputies were still there. A locksmith had arrived with a metal case and a ring of keys that clinked against one another as he worked. He removed the old lock from the front door, fitted a new cylinder, and tested it twice. The click was dry and final. One deputy taped a fresh copy of the possession notice to the glass. The date was visible beneath the county seal. Beckett looked through the door at the townhouse one last time. The roses from Tamsin's brunch were gone. The champagne had been removed. The kitchen counters were bare. Without the personal objects, the house looked like a staged model home waiting for someone else to walk through it. A neighbor named Martin, who had once accepted Beckett's invitation to a Harbor Line launch dinner, stood near his driveway with a folded newspaper under his arm. He did not wave. Beckett turned away before Martin could decide whether to speak. The moving truck had to be returned by 5 o'clock. He dropped it at the rental lot, paid the overage fee, and walked 2 blocks to the bus stop carrying one small suitcase and the duffel bag that held his remaining documents. His phone screen showed 3 missed calls from collection agencies. No messages from Tamsin. No messages from friends. No card that would pay for a hotel. When the bus arrived, he climbed aboard and took the seat near the back. The townhouse had never been proof of his success. It had only been proof that someone else kept paying for the picture. Garrick came home 2 days after Beckett left Wexford Glen. The house he shared with Morel was quiet in a way it had not been for years. No television filled the living room. No one had called to ask for money, advice, or a rescue disguised as a favor. The dining table was clear except for a single cream-colored agreement folder that Lucan had delivered that morning. Garrick set his keys beside it. Then he opened his wallet. The Platinum family expense card was gone. The replacement cards he had requested through the old family office portal had never arrived because the portal no longer recognized him. His access to the accounts had been removed with the same clean finality as Beckett's office credentials. He checked his phone. The banking application showed no available balance. It showed no monthly transfer. It showed a notice directing him to contact the independent trustee assigned to the newly created support arrangement. Garrick stared at the screen for a long time before placing the phone face down on the table. Morel was standing near the window with a cup of tea in both hands. She had changed the curtains in the living room 2 weeks earlier, replacing the heavy gold panels Garrick liked with plain linen ones that let more daylight into the room. "You knew this was coming," he said. "I knew there would be a structure," she replied. "That is not the same thing." He opened the cream folder. The first page read Independent Support Trust Agreement. The document provided for housing, groceries, medical care, utilities, and basic transportation. Every payment would be made directly by an independent trustee. There would be no cash allowance. No unsecured credit access. No discretionary transfers. No ability to charge personal expenses to Marlowe's company or family office. Each category had a monthly limit. Each request required documentation. Garrick tapped his pen against the table. This is insulting. Morel turned from the window. It is specific. It treats us like children. It treats the money like it belongs to someone else. His jaw tightened. You're enjoying this. She did not react. For years, Morel would have stepped closer, lowered her voice, and tried to soften the edges of whatever room he had made difficult. She would have told him that he was tired, that Beckett was under pressure, that Tamsin had good intentions, that Marlowe would understand if everyone just gave it time. That morning, she only set her tea down. I do not want to keep living inside the dependence you call family unity, she said. Garrick looked toward the hallway, as if one of the children might appear and restore the old arrangement. This started with Tamsin, he said. She spent too much. She pushed Beckett into things. Morel waited. Garrick changed direction. Beckett made bad decisions, but he was desperate. Marlowe left him no room to recover. Morel's hands stayed flat against the table. Beckett had a startup budget of $240,000. He had an office, equipment, account access, and 18 months of extensions. He had room. Garrick looked down at the folder again. Marlowe did not have to make it public. She did not make the forged signature public, Morel said. Beckett did when he filed a lawsuit. He lifted his head. She could have handled it privately. She did handle it privately for 18 months. That is why it got worse. The words stayed between them. Garrick picked up the phone again and pressed Marlowe's number. She answered after the second ring. Marlowe. Her voice was calm. He could hear the muted hum of office activity behind her. I received the trust agreement, he said. This is not acceptable. It is the arrangement available to you. You are cutting us off. No. I am funding basic support through an independent trustee. You cannot expect your parents to ask permission for groceries. The trustee pays the grocery account directly. That is not the point. No, Marlowe said. The point is that you want unrestricted access without accountability. Garrick paced toward the window. You are punishing us because you are angry. I am setting terms because unrestricted access became a way for people to hurt me. You are my daughter. And I was your daughter at Aurelia House. He stopped. The room became still. Morel looked down at the agreement. Garrick tried again. At least restore a stipend. Something we can manage ourselves. The trustee will review documented expenses monthly, Marlowe said. Housing, medical care, food, utilities, and basic transportation will be covered. There will be no cash stipend. His pen struck the tabletop once. You expect me to live by rules you made? I expect you to live by terms you can understand. His face reddened. For the first time in his life, Garrick had to hear a condition from the daughter he had called too serious, too controlling, too cold whenever she asked him to follow a budget that protected her company and her peace. My father still wanted control. He just wanted it funded by someone else. Morel stepped closer to the phone. Give it to me. Garrick hesitated, then handed it over. Marlowe, she said. Yes, Mom. I read every page. I understand why the trust is written this way. Thank you. Morel looked at Garrick while she spoke. Your father needs to understand something. Garrick's expression shifted. Morel did not look away. You did not lose your daughter because she became cruel, she said. You lost her because she stopped accepting cruelty as love. Garrick sat down slowly. The chair made a soft scrape against the floor. Marlowe was silent for a moment. Then she said, the agreement remains open for signature until Friday at noon. After that, the trustee will close the arrangement and all support will end. Morel nodded. We will sign it. Garrick looked at her. You cannot decide that alone. No, she said. But I can decide what I will no longer beg her to survive. The call ended. For several seconds, Garrick stared at the cream folder. Then he picked up the pen. The first condition he had ever refused to accept was that Marlowe's love did not require her surrender. Beckett's first job after the plea agreement was at a regional industrial supply warehouse on the west side of Charlotte. The building sat behind a row of truck repair shops and a concrete batch plant, where the air carried diesel exhaust, metal dust, and the sharp smell of shrink wrap heated by the afternoon sun. The warehouse supplied fasteners, safety equipment, electrical fittings, and bulk packaging materials to contractors across Mecklenburg and Gaston counties. It was not the kind of place where anyone cared about a polished business pitch. It was the kind of place where the receiving dock opened at 5:30 every morning, where delivery schedules mattered, and where a missed inventory count could delay a customer's entire job site. Beckett arrived by bus. The route stopped across the street from the warehouse entrance at 5:12 a.m. The brakes made a long, high squeal every morning before the doors folded open. He crossed the road with his lunch in a plastic container and his work boots already dusted gray from the curb. His employee badge had his name, a barcode, and a number. Nothing else. The supervisor, Curtis May, handed him a navy uniform shirt on his first day. Curtis had managed the warehouse for 16 years and had the kind of calm voice that made people understand there would be no argument worth starting. "Clock in by 5:30, Curtis said. "Scan what comes in, scan what goes out, and do not guess when you do not know something." Beckett nodded. Curtis looked at him for another second. "Nobody here needs your story. They need you to show up, lift what is yours to lift, and stop making it somebody else's problem." Then he walked away. The work was simple enough to explain and difficult enough to do correctly for 10 hours at a time. Beckett unloaded palletized boxes of bolts, gloves, conduit fittings, and industrial tape. He scanned inventory into the warehouse system. He counted damaged units, marked them for return, and pushed loaded carts through aisles where every shelf had a location code and every item had to be placed exactly where the system expected it. There were no leather chairs. There was no espresso machine. There was no glass wall with a company name printed in brushed steel. At Harbor Line, Beckett had occupied an office with a view of the city and a conference table nobody used. At the warehouse, he spent most of his day beneath fluorescent lights, listening to forklifts beep in reverse and pallets scrape across concrete. By the second week, the work had changed his hands. The skin near his palms became rough. A blister formed beneath his right thumb after he spent an entire shift breaking down shipments of galvanized pipe fittings. His shoulders ached when he climbed the stairs to his studio apartment, which sat above a laundromat near South Boulevard. The apartment had one room, a narrow kitchen, and windows that faced the bus stop. When he got home after the late shift, he could hear the buses braking below. The sound traveled through the glass and into the small space where he kept a mattress, a folding table, and 2 plastic bins of clothes. He no longer had the SUV. He no longer had the Wexford Glen townhouse. He no longer had the gold graduation watch. The watch had stayed at Aurelia House months earlier, placed in Adrian Cole's inside pocket to settle a bill Beckett should have paid himself. The suit he wore to court had been sold through a consignment shop along with 2 other jackets, a set of cufflinks, and luggage that no longer had a purpose. Each of those things had once made him feel established. None of them had been paid for by work he had actually completed. On payday, Beckett went to the payroll window near the warehouse office. The payroll clerk, a woman named Rosa Velasquez, handed him a sealed envelope. Inside was his pay stub. His gross earnings were printed at the top. Taxes came next. Then health deductions. Then the court-ordered wage garnishment. 35% of his net earnings had been withheld for restitution. The amount appeared in bold. The payment was distributed according to the schedule in his plea agreement, part to Voss Meridian Logistics, part to the financial institution that processed the fraudulent credit line, and part to restore the collateral reserve he had used without authorization. Beckett stared at the numbers. Rosa watched him without judgment. "The court order came through electronically," she said. "Payroll has to process it exactly as written." He folded the pay stub and put it in his pocket. There was no appeal to make at a payroll window. There was no version of the story that could change the calculation. One afternoon, while Beckett was stacking cartons of safety goggles near the receiving dock, a coworker named Malik noticed him looking at a news article on his phone. The headline mentioned the Voss Meridian case, though the details had already been replaced by newer scandals. "You used to be somebody important?" Malik asked. Beckett put the phone away. I used to run a company. Malik lifted another carton onto the shelf. Everybody used to be something, he said. Nobody here cares who you were. They care whether you scanned the right box and showed up for the next shift. Then he moved to the next aisle. Beckett stood there for a moment with the scanner in his hand. The next shipment arrived at 2:40 p.m. He scanned the first label, then the second, then the third. For the first time in his life, the work in front of him could not be dressed up, delegated, or charged to someone else's account. It only had to be done. And whether that became the beginning of accountability or just another performance was no longer something anyone owed him the chance to prove. The final accounting from Wexford Glen arrived on a Tuesday morning in March. Lucan brought the packet to the Voss Meridian boardroom at 8:30, before the first operations meeting began. Elodie was already there with a laptop open, a calculator beside her coffee, and 3 highlighted pages arranged in exact order across the mahogany table. Morel sat near the windows. She had started coming to the office once a week after the court case closed. Not because she had a role in the company, and not because I wanted her to monitor my work. She came because she was learning how money moved when it was used for something other than appearances. Lucan placed the final statement in front of me. The townhouse sale closed yesterday, he said. The secured balance, legal costs, sheriff fees, and preservation expenses have been paid. The remaining recoverable amount, combined with the restitution received so far and the released reserves, totals $1.48 million. Elodie slid a summary sheet beside it. The numbers were listed in columns. Townhouse sale recovery. Vehicle recovery proceeds. Restitution payments. Released collateral reserves. Court-ordered reimbursements. Every dollar had a source. Every source had a document number. Nothing had been guessed. Nothing had been rounded to make the outcome feel cleaner than it was. Morel looked at the total for a long moment. Then she said, "Do not use it to buy something bigger." Lucan glanced at her. She continued, "Do not use it to expand the house or acquire another property or build a private fund for us. We have spent enough years turning money into walls around people who did not know how to live without it." The boardroom stayed quiet. I understood what she meant. For years, every rescue had turned into another private structure. A loan became a lifestyle. A card became an expectation. A family office became an excuse for people to forget that support had limits. Money had divided my family when it became entitlement. Used correctly, it could become a door for someone who had never been handed one. I turned the final statement toward Lucan. "I want to establish a workforce fund." Elodie looked up. "What kind?" "Skills-based. Transportation, logistics, warehouse operations, welding, diesel repair, and industrial maintenance. Training grants, equipment stipends, licensing fees, and paid apprenticeships." Lucan nodded slowly. "A foundation program or a restricted fund under the existing family office?" "A separate charitable fund," I said. "Independent oversight. No Voss family member can approve recipients or redirect money." Morel's expression softened, but she did not interrupt. I continued. "The selection criteria need to be public. Applicants will be evaluated on attendance history, references, work ethic, financial need, responsibility, and willingness to complete the program. No family name. No personal connection. No exception because someone knows how to tell a convincing story." Elodie wrote as I spoke. "Initial endowment?" she asked. $1,480,000. Lucan looked at me. "That commits all recovered funds." "Yes." He closed the accounting file. "Then we need a charter, a compliance framework, and an external review committee. Start today." The charter took 6 weeks to complete. Lucan drafted the governance provisions with an outside non-profit attorney. Elodie built the financial controls. The Workforce Center director, Dr. Naomi Bell, helped design the application process and identify training partners across Charlotte. The fund would cover tuition for forklift certification, commercial driver preparation, welding classes, diesel repair programs, warehouse safety credentials, and logistics operations training. It would also provide transportation passes, work boots, tools, and childcare support for applicants who would otherwise have to choose between attending class and paying rent. We named it the Voss Skilled Futures Fund. The charter was signed on a Friday morning at the Charlotte Workforce Center. The center occupied an old brick building near the rail line, where classrooms had been converted from former loading bays. There were posters on the walls advertising apprenticeships, high school equivalency programs, and trade certifications. The air smelled like coffee, printer paper, and the faint metallic scent of welding equipment from the training room next door. A small group of scholarship candidates sat in folding chairs facing a podium. Some were young adults who had aged out of foster care. Some were parents working 2 jobs. Some had been laid off from warehouses that closed after contract losses. They wore jeans, work boots, clean shirts, and the careful seriousness of people who understood that a chance could disappear if someone decided they did not deserve it. Morel stood beside me near the front. She wore a navy dress and the pearl earrings she had left behind on the morning we went to Financial Crimes. She had begun wearing them again, but differently. Not as armor. Just as something she liked. Dr. Bell introduced the fund. Then Lucan brought the charter forward. The paper was heavy. The foundation seal had been pressed into the lower corner, leaving a raised circle beneath my fingertips. I signed first with blue ink. Morel signed as a non-governing founding supporter. Lucan signed as compliance trustee. A small applause moved through the room. Then Dr. Bell called the first recipient to the front. Her name was Aaliyah Grant. She was 21 years old and had worked night shifts at a grocery distribution center while caring for her 14-year-old brother after their mother entered long-term rehabilitation. Her application included attendance records, 2 supervisor recommendations, and a handwritten statement about wanting to become a diesel technician because she was tired of watching other people decide what jobs were possible for her. Morel held the scholarship certificate. Aaliyah approached the podium with both hands clasped in front of her. This covers your diesel repair program, your certification fees, transportation, tools, and your first 3 months of childcare support for your brother, Morel said. Aaliyah looked down at the certificate. For a moment, Morel's hand tightened around the edge of it. Then she gave it to her. You have earned the chance to build something real, Morel said. Aaliyah nodded once before stepping away. The applause returned, quiet but steady. I watched my mother as she stood beside the first person our fund had helped. She was no longer trying to hold a broken family together by asking me to accept less than I deserved. She had found a better use for care. Healing was not returning to the past and pretending it had been enough. It was taking what remained and putting it somewhere it could become useful. When the ceremony ended, I looked around the room at the work boots, the notebooks, the resumes, and the people waiting for their names to be called. We are not funding appearances anymore, I said. We are funding people who intend to build something real. Several months after the hearing, I asked my mother to meet me at Mecklenburg Animal Rescue on a Saturday morning. She did not ask why. That was one of the changes between us. Morel no longer treated every invitation from me as the beginning of a difficult conversation she needed to soften before it became real. She arrived at 10:06 wearing jeans, a navy sweater, and the pearl earrings she had started wearing again after the Workforce Fund ceremony. The shelter sat behind a veterinary clinic near the edge of Charlotte. The building was plain brick with a painted blue door, a small garden of yellow flowers near the entrance, and a handwritten sign asking visitors not to knock on kennel doors. Inside, the air smelled faintly of disinfectant, clean laundry, and dry food. Somewhere deeper in the building, a dog barked once. Then another answered. A shelter worker named Hannah Price met us near the front desk. She was in her 30s, with a green volunteer shirt and a clipboard tucked under one arm. She had worked at Mecklenburg Animal Rescue for 7 years and knew every dog by name, medical history, and the particular sound each one made when it wanted attention. You said you wanted to meet Ronan, Hannah said. Yes, I replied. She led us down a quiet hallway. The kennel area was warmer than the lobby. Metal tags clicked softly against gates as dogs moved closer to inspect us. Some wagged their tails. Some stayed back. One old hound slept beneath a folded blanket without lifting his head. Ronan was in the last kennel on the left. He was a large mixed-breed dog with black and brown fur, a white patch at his chest, and careful amber eyes. His adoption file said he was 5 years old. His previous owner had surrendered him after a leg injury required treatment the owner said had become too expensive. Ronan stood when we approached. He did not bark. He simply looked at us through the gate. Hana crouched beside the kennel. "He is gentle," she said. "He knows basic commands. He walks well on a leash. He is a little cautious at first, especially around doors." "Why doors?" Morel asked. Hana looked toward Ronan. His owner told us he used to wait by the front door for hours whenever someone left. After he was surrendered, he did the same thing here. He watches people walk away, then waits to see whether they come back. Morel did not answer right away. She slipped her fingers through the bars of the gate. Ronan moved closer, slowly enough that Hana did not need to warn us. He sniffed Morel's hand. Then he placed his nose against her palm. His fur looked soft from a distance, but it was warm and slightly coarse beneath her fingers. Morel kept her hand still. "I understand that," she said quietly. Hana looked at her. "Understand what?" "Giving loyalty to people who never learned how to keep it." Ronan leaned his shoulder against the gate. For a few seconds, the shelter sounds seemed farther away. The metal tags continued to click. A washing machine turned behind a closed door. Someone at the front desk laughed softly at something a volunteer had said. Morel looked at me. "Did you already make a decision?" "I wanted you to meet him first." She looked back at Ronan. He had not moved away from her hand. "He does not need to earn a place here," she said. "He already has one." Hana smiled. The adoption papers took 20 minutes. Ronan's file was thicker than most because it included veterinary treatment records, vaccination dates, medication notes, and the original surrender form. Morel read every page before signing. She asked about his leg, his food, and whether he liked car rides. "He is nervous for the first 10 minutes, Hana said. "After that, he usually settles down." Morel looked at Ronan through the office window. "So am I," she said. When the paperwork was finished, Hana brought out a blue collar with a new metal tag. Ronan's name was stamped across the front. The tag made a small clinking sound as she fastened it around his neck. Then we walked him outside. The morning was cool and bright. Ronan stopped at the edge of the parking lot, uncertain for one moment, before following Morel toward my car. He climbed into the back seat after she placed a folded blanket beside him. The drive to Lake Lure took nearly 2 hours. Ronan watched the highway through the window at first. Then he curled against the blanket and slept. Morel turned around twice to check on him, though he was breathing evenly and had not made a sound. My cabin sat above the lake on a quiet road lined with pines and old stone walls. I had bought it years earlier as a place to work without phones ringing outside my office door. After the court case, it became somewhere I went when I needed distance from the version of my life that had been built around emergencies. That afternoon, Ronan walked through every room. He inspected the kitchen, the screened porch, the hallway, and the rug beside the fireplace. He paused near the back door, looking out toward the water, then returned when Morel called him. By evening, he had chosen a place beside her chair. Morel sat near the window with a book open in her lap. Ronan rested against her feet, his head across one paw, while the lake caught the last of the sunlight below us. I stood in the kitchen doorway and watched them. The cabin no longer felt like a place where I went to recover after a fight. It felt like a place where life had room to arrive. Loyalty was never supposed to be purchased. It was supposed to be recognized. Several months after the hearing, I asked my mother to meet me at Mecklenburg Animal Rescue on a Saturday morning. She did not ask why. That was one of the changes between us. Morel no longer treated every invitation from me as the beginning of a difficult conversation she needed to soften before it became real. She arrived at 10:06 wearing jeans, a navy sweater, and the pearl earrings she had started wearing again after the workforce fund ceremony. The shelter sat behind a veterinary clinic near the edge of Charlotte. The building was plain brick with a painted blue door, a small garden of yellow flowers near the entrance, and a handwritten sign asking visitors not to knock on kennel doors. Inside, the air smelled faintly of disinfectant, clean laundry, and dry food. Somewhere deeper in the building, a dog barked once. Then another answered. A shelter worker named Hannah Price met us near the front desk. She was in her 30s, with a green volunteer shirt and a clipboard tucked under one arm. She had worked at Mecklenburg Animal Rescue for 7 years and knew every dog by name, medical history, and the particular sound each one made when it wanted attention. You said you wanted to meet Ronan, Hannah said. Yes, I replied. She led us down a quiet hallway. The kennel area was warmer than the lobby. Metal tags clicked softly against gates as dogs moved closer to inspect us. Some wagged their tails. Some stayed back. One old hound slept beneath a folded blanket without lifting his head. Ronan was in the last kennel on the left. He was a large mixed-breed dog with black and brown fur, a white patch at his chest, and careful amber eyes. His adoption file said he was 5 years old. His previous owner had surrendered him after a leg injury required treatment the owner said had become too expensive. Ronan stood when we approached. He did not bark. He simply looked at us through the gate. Hannah crouched beside the kennel. He is gentle, she said. He knows basic commands. He walks well on a leash. He is a little cautious at first, especially around doors. Why doors? Morel asked. Hannah looked toward Ronan. His owner told us he used to wait by the front door for hours whenever someone left. After he was surrendered, he did the same thing here. He watches people walk away, then waits to see whether they come back. Morel did not answer right away. She slipped her fingers through the bars of the gate. Ronan moved closer, slowly enough that Hannah did not need to warn us. He sniffed Morel's hand. Then he placed his nose against her palm. His fur looked soft from a distance, but it was warm and slightly coarse beneath her fingers. Morel kept her hand still. I understand that, she said quietly. Hannah looked at her. Understand what? Giving loyalty to people who never learned how to keep it. Ronan leaned his shoulder against the gate. For a few seconds, the shelter sounds seemed farther away. The metal tags continued to click. A washing machine turned behind a closed door. Someone at the front desk laughed softly at something a volunteer had said. Morel looked at me. Did you already make a decision? I wanted you to meet him first. She looked back at Ronan. He had not moved away from her hand. He does not need to earn a place here, she said. He already has one. Hannah smiled. The adoption papers took 20 minutes. Ronan's file was thicker than most because it included veterinary treatment records, vaccination dates, medication notes, and the original surrender form. Morel read every page before signing. She asked about his leg, his food, and whether he liked car rides. He is nervous for the first 10 minutes, Hannah said. After that, he usually settles down. Morel looked at Ronan through the office window. So am I, she said. When the paperwork was finished, Hannah brought out a blue collar with a new metal tag. Ronan's name was stamped across the front. The tag made a small clinking sound as she fastened it around his neck. Then we walked him outside. The morning was cool and bright. Ronan stopped at the edge of the parking lot, uncertain for one moment, before following Morel toward my car. He climbed into the back seat after she placed a folded blanket beside him. The drive to Lake Lure took nearly 2 hours. Ronan watched the highway through the window at first. Then he curled against the blanket and slept. Morel turned around twice to check on him, though he was breathing evenly and had not made a sound. My cabin sat above the lake on a quiet road lined with pines and old stone walls. I had bought it years earlier as a place to work without phones ringing outside my office door. After the court case, it became somewhere I went when I needed distance from the version of my life that had been built around emergencies. That afternoon, Ronan walked through every room. He inspected the kitchen, the screened porch, the hallway, and the rug beside the fireplace. He paused near the back door, looking out toward the water, then returned when Morel called him. By evening, he had chosen a place beside her chair. Morel sat near the window with a book open in her lap. Ronan rested against her feet, his head across one paw, while the lake caught the last of the sunlight below us. I stood in the kitchen doorway and watched them. The cabin no longer felt like a place where I went to recover after a fight. It felt like a place where life had room to arrive. Loyalty was never supposed to be purchased. It was supposed to be recognized.